A price is always exacted for what fate bestows, the young narrator began, his voice laced with a wistful melancholy. His words echoed in the dimly lit tavern, drawing the attention of its patrons. I was a nobody, he continued, his tone measured, as if peeling back layers of an old wound. No time to notice the sun's brightness. My parents couldn't help me, and I wasn't highly educated. I had no choice but to make it on my own in the city. The audience leaned in entranced. I applied to countless jobs, but no one ever hired me. Maybe it's because I'm not good at expressing myself, not the best communicator. I just couldn't prove my worth. Once I survived on 2 loaves of bread over 3 days. Hunger kept me awake at night, but at least I'd paid a month's rent in advance. It kept the winter wind outside. The young man paused, his bright blue eyes clouded with reflection. Finally, I found a job at the hospital's morgue. My duty? To keep vigil over the dead. The tavern fell silent save for the faint creaking of wooden chairs. Nighttime at the hospital was colder than I ever imagined, he said, his voice lowering. The lights in the corridors were out, shrouding everything in darkness. The only glow came from the rooms, and the smell. He wrinkled his nose at the memory. The stench of death clung to everything. He hesitated, then continued. It wasn't glamorous, but it put food on the table. Nights were quiet, leaving me time to study. Books were out of reach. I couldn't afford them, but I made do. Few ventured into the morgue, and those who did came to deliver or retrieve bodies for cremation. It was lonely, but it was survival. The young man leaned back in his chair, his gaze distant. Then one day they brought in a new corpse. It was my predecessor, the one who'd left so suddenly. Gasps rippled through the tavern, and he smiled faintly at their reaction. Curiosity got the better of me. Once the others left, I opened the body bag. There he was, an old man with bluish-white skin, his face lined with deep wrinkles. The poor lighting made him look otherworldly. He had no clothes, not even a scrap of cloth. The narrator gestured faintly, as though the memory lingered in the air. There was a strange mark on his chest, a bluish-black stain I couldn't explain. It didn't feel unusual when I touched it, but it unsettled me. Looking at him, I wondered if I'd end up like that when I grew old. He paused for effect, then said softly, I promised I'd see him through his final journey. I wouldn't let bureaucrats toss him into the river like trash. I'd sacrifice some sleep and take him to a proper resting place. The tavern was silent except for the occasional creak of the floorboards. Since that day, every time I close my eyes I see fog, thick and unyielding. Something moves in the mist. Something not human. But when I try to tell others, they just laugh. They say the job's driving me mad. The narrator stopped abruptly. A man sitting at the bar, dressed in a drab duffel coat and pale yellow trousers, tilted his head. And the narrator smirked, his boyish charm suddenly evident. And then I quit the job and came back to the countryside, just so I could spin you this yarn. Laughter erupted, breaking the tension. The man at the bar, his dark bowler hat resting beside him, chuckled nervously. Were you just pulling our leg? Gotcha, the narrator exclaimed, spreading his arms wide. The tavern roared with laughter, though some looked on skeptically. A middle-aged man with a stern expression leaned forward. You ain't from around here, are ya? He asked the guest. Lumien's always spinning tales. Yesterday, he was a scorned lover. Today he's a watchman for the dead. Aye, chimed in another farmer. 30 years east of the Serenzo River, 30 years west. He's full of it. The young man, Lumien, leaned casually against the bar, his grin unwavering. As you all know, these stories aren't mine. They're my sister's work. She writes for some column, asterisk novel weekly asterisk or something. The guest at the bar raised an eyebrow. Your sister? That's right, Lumien said, standing tall. Aurora Lee. And if you've a problem with my last name, you can take it up with her. At the mention of Lee, a woman sitting with the guest stirred, her silver bells tinkling faintly. She was striking, her light gray hair tied in an elegant bun, her outfit the picture of city sophistication. Lee, she repeated, her voice soft but curious. Lumien's grin widened. What of it? Got a problem with my name? The guest, Ryan Koss, intervened. Your last name is infamous. Sailors and merchants have a saying. I'd rather face pirate kings than a man named Frank Lee. Lumian tilted his head, intrigued. Sounds like a legend worth chasing. Ryan chuckled. Perhaps. Now, what are you drinking? La Fée Verte, Lumian replied without hesitation. Ryan frowned. Absinthe. Lumian shrugged. Life's hard enough. A little madness won't hurt. Ryan nodded and signaled the bartender. 2 glasses of La Fée Verte. As the green liquid was poured, the bells on the woman's veil jingled once more, drawing Lumian's attention. Her smile remained enigmatic as she said, Perhaps we'll hear another of your tales before the night is through. Lumian raised his glass, his blue eyes gleaming with mischief. Stick around. The night's still young. Ryan offered a polite bow to Lumian, his voice tinged with regret. Forgive me. I didn't anticipate such an unusual situation. Lumian smirked, waving off the apology. No need for that. But if you're feeling guilty, I wouldn't mind another glass of *La Fée Verte. Before Ryan could respond, Lumian shifted the conversation with a mischievous glint in his eye. What brings foreigners like you to Cordoue? Surely you're not here just for the scenery. Wool? Leather? Something more exotic? The mention of trade felt natural. Most of Cordoue's villagers earned their living as shepherds. Ryan seized the opportunity to explain their true purpose. We came to meet with the Eternal Blazing Sun Church's Padre Guillaume Benet, but he seems to be absent from both the cathedral and his home. Pierre, now enjoying the last of Ryan's free absinthe, leaned in helpfully. There's only one church in Cordoue, he reminded, though his tone hinted at the weight the Padre's name carried. Around the bar, the locals kept to their drinks, their silence betraying an unspoken unease. The name Guillaume Benet was not one uttered lightly. Lumian pondered for a moment, sipping his drink thoughtfully. I might know where he's hiding, he said finally. Need me to take you there? Leah spoke before Ryan could. If it's not too much trouble, she said with a graceful nod. Once I've finished my drink, Lumian replied, raising his glass. He drained the light green alcohol in a single gulp and set the glass down with a flourish. Rising to his feet, he grinned. Let's go. Ryan stood as well, motioning for Valentine and Leah to join him. Merci beaucoup, he said earnestly. Lumian clapped him on the shoulder. No trouble at all. You heard my story, and I enjoyed your drink. That makes us friends, doesn't it? Ryan nodded. Oui. Lumian's grin widened mischievously. Ah, then it's good to meet you, my cabbages. Ryan froze mid-step, his face a mix of confusion and embarrassment. Cabbages? Leah raised an eyebrow, while Valentine's frown deepened. Lumian gestured expansively. Of course. It's a term of endearment around here. Ask anyone in the Darige region. They'll tell you. A tradition for centuries, my cabbages. The locals at the bar nodded, barely suppressing their laughter. The amused twinkle in their eyes betrayed the jest. When Ryan remained skeptical, Lumian tapped his chin theatrically. Not a fan of cabbages? Fine, let's try something else. My dear bunnies, darling chicks, lovely ducks, or perhaps adorable lambs. Take your pick. Leah sighed, her tinkling bells adding to the comedic air. Let's stick with cabbages. At least it sounds neutral. Cabbages it is, Lumian declared, his grin triumphant. As they left the tavern, the night cloaked Cordoue in shadows, broken only by faint starlight and the occasional glow from a window. The Eternal Blazing Sun Cathedral loomed in the village square, its silhouette merging with the darkness. We've been here already. It's empty, Valentine grumbled. Lumian chuckled. No one at the front doesn't mean no one at all. He led them around to the cemetery, stopping at a dark brown wooden side door. Without waiting, Lumian fiddled with the keyhole and pushed the door open. Isn't that breaking and entering? Ryan asked, frowning. We're here to visit, not to fight, Leah added, her bells jingling faintly. Lumian shrugged and knocked lightly. Anyone home? If you don't answer, we're coming in. No response. Pushing the door fully open, Lumian gestured dramatically. After you. Ryan hesitated before stepping inside, his companions close behind. The air within was heavy, the dim light casting eerie shadows. Do you hear that? Ryan suddenly asked, his voice low. Lumian nodded, his expression serious. I hear it too. He shoved a door open, revealing a confessional-like chamber. In the faint light, they saw a shocking scene. A naked man and a fair-skinned woman entwined on the floor. The man leaped to his feet, his face livid. Sacred Blue, you've ruined the Holy Church's plans. Amidst the chaos, Lumion smirked and stepped back toward the door. Ah, seems we've found our padre. Au revoir, my cabbages. With that, he slipped out into the night, leaving the others stunned. Walking along the quiet country road, Lumion whistled a carefree tune under the stars. Hands in his pockets, he muttered to himself, as expected, the padre's having an affair with Madame Pualis. He paused, considering. These foreigners, they'll rattle him. The padre will pay a fortune to keep his secrets buried. Serves him right for lusting after Aurora. A wry smile crept across his face as he reached his peculiar semi-subterranean home. Perfect timing for a little leverage, he murmured, stepping inside. Upstairs, Aurora sat on the roof, gazing at the stars. Her golden hair shimmered in the moonlight, her expression serene. Lumion climbed up beside her, breaking the silence. What's so fascinating about the stars, Grande sir? Aurora tapped his head playfully. Call me that properly next time. She stretched, her voice soft. A philosopher once said, only two things deserve reverence. The morality in our hearts and the stars above. Lumion chuckled. That's Emperor Roselle's line, isn't it? Aurora laughed, catching the scent of absinthe on him. You've been drinking again. Socializing, Lumion corrected, recounting the evening's escapade. Aurora smiled wryly. Try not to provoke the padre too much. It's troublesome enough having him around. Lumion pouted. But he. Bedtime, Aurora interrupted, sprinkling a handful of silver dust. With a graceful leap, she disappeared into the house, leaving Lumion alone under the stars. He sighed, watching the fading light. I wonder when I'll have powers like hers.
Hey, welcome to Firescale Audiobooks. If you enjoy our audiobooks, please consider subscribing to the channel. Also, feel free to share your review in the comments section below.
Lumion lingered atop the roof, reluctant to descend just yet. His visage was a picture of stoicism, betraying no emotion. Gone was the mischievous young man who frequented the tavern, always ready with a grin and a jest. In his place was a composed and resolute figure, unrecognizable to those who knew him before. Since discovering Aurora's magical powers by chance, Lumion had been obsessed with obtaining them. But Aurora always warned him against it, citing the immense danger and agony that came with wielding such abilities. She refused to divulge the secret, even if she knew how to grant them to mere mortals. Lumion couldn't force her to reveal the method, so he resorted to pleading and persuading her at every turn. After a few seconds of contemplation, Lumion sprang to his feet and made his way down to the edge of the roof. He climbed back to the second floor using the wooden ladder. He strolled to Aurora's room, only to find the brown wooden door ajar before peeking inside. Aurora sat at her desk, scribbling away with a champagne fountain pen, dressed in a sky-blue gown. What is she writing so late into the night? Is it related to witchcraft? Lumion placed his hand on the door and quipped, Writing in your diary, are you? Who writes in a diary, honestly? Aurora replied without looking up from her writing. Lumion wasn't satisfied with her answer. But didn't Emperor Roselle keep several volumes of diaries? Roselle, the last emperor of the Intis Republic where the siblings currently lived, had brought down the Sauron dynasty and assumed the mantle of Caesar, thereby declaring himself emperor. The man had made countless strides in the fields of science and engineering, having been credited with inventing the steam engine. Not to mention, he had charted the sea route to the southern continent and sparked an age of colonization. He was the embodiment of his time, a symbol of a bygone era over a century ago. However, in his twilight years, he was double-crossed and assassinated in the White Maple Palace of Trier. In the aftermath of his death, his diary pages were disseminated throughout the world, yet they were written in a tongue that nobody could decipher, as if the words didn't exist in this world. That's why Roselle ain't no honest man, Aurora. Her back turned to Lumion, scoffed. So what are you scribbling there? Lumion queried. That was the crux of the matter. Aurora responded with a shrug, her voice dripping with indifference. A letter. To whom? Lumion couldn't help but scowl. Aurora paused, laying down her exquisite golden champagne fountain pen, intricately patterned, to review her words and phrases. A pen pal. And what now? Lumion furrowed his brow, thoroughly perplexed. What the hell was that? Aurora chuckled, running her fingers through her lustrous golden hair as she began to enlighten her brother. That's why I keep telling you to read more and study more. Quit wasting your days drinking and carousing. Look at you. What sets you apart from an illiterate? Pen pals are friends who become acquainted through newspapers, magazines, and other publications. They've never met and rely solely on letters to keep in touch. What's the point of having such a friend? Lumian asked, rather concerned about this matter. As he withdrew his hand from the door, he scratched his chin, deep in thought. Aurora had never had a boyfriend before, so he couldn't allow her to be fooled by someone she had never met before. Meaning, Aurora thought about it seriously. First off, emotional value. I know you don't understand the concept. Humans need to connect with one another, but some things and emotions cannot be shared with the villagers, nor with you. I require a more private outlet to release my thoughts. These pen pals, whom I have not met in person, are perfect for that. Secondly, do not underestimate my pen pals. Some of them hold great power, and some possess extensive knowledge. For example, a pen pal gifted me this battery-operated lamp. Kerosene lamps and candles are too damaging to the eyes, and not ideal for writing at night. Without waiting for Lumian to ask another question, Aurora waved her hand behind her. Get some rest, my inebriated brother. Bonne nuit. All right, bonne nuit, Lumian replied, trying to hide his frustration. Aurora instructed, don't forget to close the door. It's positively frigid in here with all the windows, and the door open like this. Lumian slowly shut the door made of brown wood, then headed to his room where he removed his shoes before sitting on the bed. In the dimness of the night, Lumian could make out the wooden table beside the window, the slanted chair, the small bookshelf against the wall, and the wardrobe on the other side. He sat still, lost in thought. He knew Aurora was a woman who kept her secrets to herself, and there were things she had not revealed to him. Lumian was not surprised, but he was worried that her secrets might put her in danger. And when reality hit, his options were limited. He was just an ordinary person, with a robust body and a sharp wit. Thoughts came rushing in like waves crashing on the shore, and just as quickly they receded. Lumian took a deep breath and made his way to the washroom to freshen up. Afterward, he removed his jacket-style brown coat and collapsed onto the cold bed. The April air in the mountains was still nippy. In the midst of his fugue state, Lumian perceived a murky mist, enveloping his surroundings and erasing everything in sight. He trudged through the haze in a daze, yet regardless of which direction he took or how far he went, the fog always led him back to the same place, his bedroom. The room was fashioned with a white four-piece bed, a wooden table and chair poised in front of the window, bookshelves, wardrobes, and the like. Phew! Lumian's eyes flickered open with a start, the morning sun casting a light through the thin blue curtains. He sat up, staring blankly at the room, feeling as if he was still trapped in a dream. The same dream he had been having for days, the gray fog that refused to clear. He raised a hand to his temples and muttered to himself in a deep voice, "It's getting more frequent. I have the same dream almost every day." Lumian's calm demeanor belied the fact that this dream hadn't brought about any negative effects, but it certainly had also failed to yield any positive outcomes. "I pray that hidden in this is something propitious," Lumian murmured, as he rose from the bed. Lumian opened the door to the corridor, and was immediately met with a sound emanating from Aurora's room. What a coincidence! Lumian smiled. But then, a sudden thought hit him, causing him to take a step back and stand at the edge of the door. When Aurora's bedroom door creaked open, Lumian quickly raised his right hand and began to massage his temples with a slightly pained expression on his face. "What's wrong?" Aurora noticed his discomfort. "Success!" Lumian cheered inwardly as he tried his best to calm himself down. "I had that dream again," he replied in a deep voice. Aurora's golden locks of hair cascaded down her shoulders as she furrowed her brows with concern. The previous method didn't work. She murmured to herself before suggesting, "Perhaps I should find you a hypnotist, a real hypnotist, and see what caused it." "The kind with magical powers?" Lumian questioned deliberately. Aurora nodded lightly in response. "One of your pen pals." Lumian couldn't help but ask, "Why do you care about this? Think about how to solve your own problem." Aurora retorted without hesitation. Isn't that what's on my mind? Lumion muttered inwardly. He took the opportunity to say, Aurora, if I become a warlock and gain extraordinary powers, I should be able to unlock the secret of the dream and end it completely. Don't even think about it. Aurora replied without hesitation. Her expression softened as she continued, Lumion, I won't lie to you. This path we're taking is dangerous, painful, and downright treacherous. If I had any other choice, and if the world wasn't spiraling out of control, I'd be content with being a regular old writer and living a peaceful life. Lumion didn't hesitate to interject. Then let me shoulder the burden of danger and pain. I'll protect you, while you do what you love. Those words had been repeating in his head for quite some time. Aurora went quiet for a couple of seconds before a grin spread across her face. Are you discriminating against women? Before Lumion could say a word, she added with a serious tone. It's too late to turn back now. Ain't no going back to what we had before. Fine, I get it. I'm gonna go wash up. You study hard at home today, and get ready for the college entrance exams in June. You said it yourself, the world is getting more dangerous. What's the point of taking exams? Lumion muttered. He believed that the key to success was strength, not some paper degree. Aurora just smiled and said, Knowledge is power, my uneducated brother. Lumion had no response, so he just watched Aurora walk into the washroom. In the afternoon, in the bustling village square of Cordu, Raymond Gregg caught sight of Lumion Lee crouched under an elm tree. His thoughts were shrouded in mystery. Shouldn't you be holed up at home with your nose buried in those books? Raymond approached him, his voice dripping with envy. Raymond was Lumion's confidant, standing at a moderate 1.7 meters, with brown hair and brown eyes. He was an ordinary-looking fellow with a slightly flushed complexion. Lumion looked up at him and offered a charming grin. Did Aurora not fill you in? Even the hangman deserves a respite. I've been cooped up for so long, I needed a break. All morning, he had been ruminating on the possibility of acquiring extraordinary powers without Aurora's assistance. This required him to seek out clues and take the initiative to investigate. Eventually, he felt that the rumors of magical powers circulating throughout the village held some truth and leads, so he purposely waited for Raymond here. If I were in your shoes, I wouldn't rest for more than 15 minutes, Raymond drawled, leaning casually against the elm tree. We don't have a sister who's well-read enough to teach us. I plan on learning how to herd sheep next year. Lumion paid no attention to Raymond's remarks and spoke reflectively. Recall the tale of the warlock for me. Raymond couldn't quite understand Lumion's intentions, furrowing his brow in confusion. The one about the warlock. In the past, there was a warlock in our village, but he died later. On the day of his burial, an owl flew in from outside and perched atop his bed. It only departed after the coffin was carried out. Then the coffin became unbearably heavy. It took 9 bulls to pull it. Lumion pressed further. How long ago was this? Raymond's expression grew increasingly perplexed. How should I know? I heard it from my father. Lumion sprang to his feet, his eyes flashing with determination. Then let's go to your father. He had always been a man of action, and he knew that investigating the village legend couldn't wait. If he dallied, his sister Aurora would surely catch wind of it, and she would never allow him to proceed. In Aurora's eyes, delving into the realm of extraordinary powers was tantamount to playing with fire. How can I not know that there's danger? Aurora wouldn't lie to me about this. But even if the world is ablaze, I have to keep walking. I can't let Aurora face this alone. As he got up, this thought flashed across Lumion's mind. Every time Aurora mentioned that the world was becoming more dangerous, the seriousness and worry on her face couldn't be any more genuine. Raymond Gregg looked at Lumion with confusion etched on his face. Why are you looking for him? Lumion fixed him with a withering look. Ask him how long ago the legend of the warlock took place. Why is this guy struggling to comprehend such a simple matter? Perhaps I need to find some time to test his intelligence. Raymond still looked baffled as he gazed at Lumion. Why do you need to know such details? Should I bother trying to explain it to this clueless fellow? Or should I simply come up with a plausible excuse? He weighed his options. Lumion's mind raced as he considered his next move. He knew that he couldn't keep his investigations a secret from his friends, But he also knew that pursuing the truth about the legend was a risky move. However, he quickly came up with an idea. He flashed a grin that he usually reserved for moments when he was about to deceive someone. Raymond took 2 steps back, sensing that something was amiss. "Spill it." Lumian adjusted his dark-colored shirt and linen jacket before smiling. "I believe the legend of the warlock is worthy of our attention." "What's so important about it?" Raymond asked after some thought. "There was indeed a warlock in our very village of Cordu in the past," Lumian said with a serious expression. "Think about it, my friend. When I lie, I don't provide specific details like the time, place, and background that anyone could easily verify. However, this legend mentions a warlock who lived in Cordu, and if it were a fabrication, it would be too easy for someone to expose it as such." "But that was ages ago," Raymond countered. "I'm also referring to the people who were around when the legend first started circulating," Lumian explained, his smile widening. "They could have easily confirmed whether or not a warlock lived in Cordu at that time. And since the legend has been passed down through generations, it's highly likely that it's based on a real event." Raymond remained unconvinced. "But when you make up stories, you often use phrases like more than 100 years ago, centuries ago, long, long ago, to make it impossible for anyone to verify." "That's precisely why I need to confirm it with your father," Lumian replied, a sly look in his eye that said, "You see where I'm going with this, don't you?" "That's true." Raymond nodded slowly, accepting Lumian's explanation, but he couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't quite right. As they left the square and delved deeper into the village, Raymond had a sudden epiphany. "Mon Dieu, why do you want to confirm if such a legend is true? Warlock, mon ami, that's what we're searching for. If we can confirm the house where he lived and the place where he was buried, we might uncover his secret and gain magical powers that go beyond mere mortals," Lumian replied, his truthful words dripping with deceit. Raymond's expression turned skeptical. "Don't tell me lies. Mon ami, most of those tales are created to scare little children. How can they be true? And on top of that, anyone who seeks the power of a warlock will end up in the Inquisition." The Intis Republic lay on the northern continent, where the orthodox deities were the eternal blazing sun and the god of steam and machinery. These 2 churches divided the faith of almost all the people, and they didn't allow the Church of Evernight Goddess, the Church of the Lord of Storms from the Lone Kingdom, the Church of Earth Mother from the Fainapotter Kingdom, the Church of the God of Knowledge and Wisdom from Lenberg, and the Church of the God of Combat from the Fasak Empire to come in and preach. The Eternal Blazing Sun Church's Inquisition was feared by all. Countless heretics had been locked up and subjected to unimaginable torture. Lumian laughed. "Why are you fretting now, my friend? You said it yourself, most of those legends are false. The chances of finding a warlock's remains are slim to none. Besides, even if we do stumble upon the remains of a warlock, we don't have to take on his forbidden power. We can give it to the church and get a handsome reward. Oh right, a warlock's grave is sure to be overflowing with treasures." The church that Lumian spoke of was the Church of the Eternal Blazing Sunday. The Church of the God of Steam and Machinery wasn't found in Cordu. Instead, it was usually located in large cities and places with factories. Seeing the temptation growing in Raymond's eyes, Lumian couldn't help but click his tongue in satisfaction. "Do you really want to be a shepherd, my friend?" The shepherd here was not talking about the romanticized idea of a pastoral shepherd that city dwellers often had. No, this was a profession. Every morning, they would have to lead a flock of sheep out to graze and watch over them. Cordu was located in Dirige, Riston province. Being a shepherd was a profession here, a tough and lonely profession. They worked for sheep owners, herding dozens, even hundreds of sheep back and forth between the mountains and plains. This was known as a herding. Every autumn, the mountains around Cordu would wither, and the shepherds would lead the sheep out of the mountain pass to the warmer plains far away, sometimes crossing borders into Fainapotter, Lenberg, and other countries. By the beginning of May, they would have brought the sheep back to various villages to shear them and wean the lambs. In June, they would trek up the mountains and into the tall ranges. They'd live in shacks and make cheese while grazing the sheep until the weather turned cold. The shepherds spent their entire lives on the move, traveling from place to place. They only had a small window to return to the village, which made starting a family nearly impossible. Most of them were single, and the few widows who had no choice but to herd sheep for a living were highly sought after by the shepherds. Raimund fell silent. After a long while, he hesitantly said, "I'll listen to ya. It does sound like fun, and I could use something to pass the time." In the ordinary course of events, once the family decided which child would become a shepherd, they would dispatch him to a certain shepherd's location to assist between the ages of 15 to 18. There, he would learn the ropes of shepherding. 3 years later, the youngster would officially become a shepherd and seek employment elsewhere. 17-year-old Raimund, however, had found several reasons to postpone this matter for over 2 years. If his circumstances did not alter, he would have to start learning how to herd next year. "Come on," Lumion said, patting Raimund's shoulder. "Is your father in the fields or at home? Recently, there hasn't been much work. Lent is approaching swiftly. He's either at home or at the tavern." Raimund let out a voice of envy. "You don't know anything about this? You're definitely not a farmer. You have a fortunate sister." Lumion put his hands in his pockets and sauntered ahead, disregarding Raimund's lamentations. As they approached the rundown tavern in the village, a person emerged from the side street. This individual was dressed in a lengthy dark brown coat with a hood. A rope was tied around his waist, and he wore a pair of brand-new supple black leather shoes. "Pierre? Pierre of the berries?" Raimund cried out in surprise. Lumion halted in his tracks and turned to look. "That's me," Pierre Barry replied with a wide grin and a wave of his hand. He was a scrawny man with sunken eyes and greasy curly hair. His stubble suggested it had been quite some time since he last shaved. "Why are you back?" Raimund asked in confusion. Pierre Barry was a shepherd, and it was only the beginning of April. He should be tending to his sheep in the fields beyond the mountain pass. How in the world did he find himself in the village? He had only just begun his journey, and even if he had gone to Lemberg or the north of Fanepotter, it would take him a month to return to the Darige Mountains. With his warm, smiling blue eyes, Pierre exclaimed joyfully, "Isn't it almost Lent? I haven't celebrated it for years. I can't miss it this year. Don't you worry. I have a companion to help me look after the sheep. That's the beauty of being a shepherd. Without a supervisor, as long as I can find someone to help me, I can go wherever I please. I'm free as a bird." Lent was a widely celebrated festival throughout Intis. People welcomed the arrival of spring in different ways, and prayed for a fruitful harvest for the year. Although it had nothing to do with the Church of the Eternal Blazing Sun, or the Church of the God of Steam and Machinery, it had already turned into folklore, and didn't involve the worship of pagan deities. Therefore, it had gained the tacit approval of the Orthodox factions. "You want to see who'll be chosen as the spring elf this year, don't you?" Lumion teased, flashing a grin. In Cordu, the people selected a gorgeous girl to play the role of the spring elf for Lent. It was all part of the celebration. Pierre laughed along. "I hope it's your sister Aurora, but she definitely won't agree, and she's not the right age either." "All right," he said, pointing towards the tavern just a stone's throw away. "I'll head to the cathedral to pray. Drinks on me later." Raimund absent-mindedly replied, "No need. You don't have much dough. Haha, as the good Lord himself has said. Even if there's only 1 copper coin, we have to share it with our poor brothers." He recited an adage that was well known among the shepherds in the Darige region. Lumion beamed at Raimund, saying, "Pierre's loaded. He's definitely treating us to a drink." He pointed to Pierre Barry's spanking new leather shoes. Pierre Barry was thrilled. "My new boss is not too shabby. He gave me a few sheep and some wool, cheese, and leather." The shepherds were compensated with food, a small sum of money, and communal animals, cheese, wool, and leather. The amount they received was dependent on the agreement they had signed with their employer. For shepherds who had to travel long distances, having a good and suitable pair of leather shoes was the most pressing and practical desire. As Lumion watched Pierre Barry strut towards the town square, his gaze gradually became solemn and filled with suspicion. He silently muttered to himself, "Going away for a week or 2 or maybe even a month just to attend Lent." Lumion paused for a moment, his eyes scanning the area before he turned and strode towards the local watering hole with Raimund. The tavern was a nondescript establishment with no fancy moniker to speak of. The townsfolk affectionately referred to it as Old Tavern. Upon entering, Lumien's eyes darted around the room in their habitual manner. Suddenly his gaze came to a halt. There before him was the foreigner who had departed so hastily the night before. She was alone, not in the company of Ryan, Leah, and Valentine. Her dress was a long flowing orange garment, and her locks were a rich brown, tousled in gentle curls. Her piercing, sky-blue eyes were fixed on the scarlet-hued drink that graced her delicate hand. Beautiful and languid, she seemed out of place in the seedy, dimly lit tavern. Kirsch, as expected of someone from a big city, Lumien's gaze eventually landed on the glass in the lady's hand. The distilled spirit made from sugar and fermented cherries had a color and texture that appealed to the ladies. Of course, they could replace the cherries with other fruits, but it would alter the taste only slightly. Corda's Old Tavern had a limited stock of high-grade wine, including Kirsch, which Madame Pualis fell in love with during her visit to the provincial capital Bigorre. Madame Pualis was the wife of Beist, the local administrator and territorial judge. Her noble ancestors had lost their title during Emperor Rosel's reign. Lumien knew that she was also one of the mistresses of the Padre, Guillaume Binet, but not many people in the village knew about it. Lumien shifted his gaze away from the lady and walked towards the bar counter. A man in his 40s wearing a linen shirt and trousers of the same color was sitting there. His brown hair was no longer lush, and his face was creased from years of hard labor. He was none other than Pierre Greg, Raymond's father. Another Pierre. At least a third of the people at the bar would answer to the call of Pierre. Lumien had joked earlier in front of Leah, Ryan, and the others. In the village, when people talked about Pierre or Guillaume, they had to specify which family they were referring to. Many families had fathers and children with the same names, making it impossible to tell them apart without adding Père, Ain, or Junior to their names. Raymond sauntered up to his father's side and asked, "Papa, why don't you go to the square and chat with the others?" The men in the village always convened under the ancient elm tree, or in someone's abode, where they'd spend the day playing dice, cards, chess, and swapping all sorts of rumors. The tavern costs money after all. Pierre Greg, with a glass of rich red wine in hand, turned to his second son and said, "We'll go later. There shouldn't be many people at the square now." "That's right. Where did all the men in the village go?" Lumien was immediately perplexed. He had noticed the absence of the village men at the square. "Monsieur, I want to ask you something," Lumien said bluntly. Pierre Greg immediately turned alert. A new prank. The story of the boy who cried wolf does indeed have a basis in reality. Lumien turned his head, gesturing for Raymond to speak. Raymond hesitated for a moment, gathering his thoughts. "Papa, how long ago did the warlock legend you told me happen? The one where it took 9 bulls to pull the coffin?" Pierre Greg gulped down a mouthful of wine, his brow furrowed in puzzlement. "Why are you asking this? You know, your Pepe told me this when I was just a wee lad. The Riston province, where Cordoue was located, and the neighboring provinces of Alais and Suet were located in the south of the Intis Republic. They were famous grape producers, and the wine here, especially the inferior ones, was very cheap. In some years, people could even drink wine like water." Raymond was disappointed because it had been a long time since his grandfather had passed on. Suddenly, Pierre Greg chimed in. "Your Pepe claimed that he saw it with his own 2 eyes when he was but a young man. It spooked him so much that he became deathly afraid of owls. He was convinced that their evil talons could snatch his very soul away." Lumien and Raymond's eyes sparked with excitement, almost in unison. There were actual clues. The legend of the warlock. It was something that someone had actually experienced. Did Pepe mention anything about where the warlock lived, or where he was buried? Raymond asked eagerly. Pierre Greg shrugged. "Who cares?" Not one to be deterred, Raymond persisted, determined to glean any shred of information. Before he could speak, Lumien intervened with a gentle touch on his shoulder as he spoke loudly. "The river awaits us." Raymond was just about to take his leave with Lumien, when Pierre Greg suddenly remembered something. "Hold up, Raymond. You'll soon be a Green Watcher, won't you? There's something you need to be aware of." Green Watchers had the crucial responsibility of patrolling the highland pastures around the village and nearby fields to prevent any illegal grazing during the prohibited period or livestock from ravaging the saplings. Lumian didn't pay much heed to the conversation and made his way to the tavern's washroom. As he exited the restroom, he took a detour to the female foreigner who was sipping on kirsch. It was impossible to discern her age. Although he had no intentions of striking up a conversation, he observed her with great detail. It might come in handy in the future, just like how he had used Ryan, Leah, and Valentine to infiltrate the Padre's scandalous scene. After a few subtle glances, Lumian was poised to head for the entrance of the tavern to wait for Raimund when the languid lady in the orange dress looked up. Before Lumian could retract his gaze, his eyes met hers. Lumian felt a little awkward as his thick skin couldn't protect him from the unexpected encounter. Many thoughts immediately surfaced in his mind. Maybe I should take a cue from the padre and administrators of the church and praise her beauty? Or perhaps I should switch gears and hit on her. Alternatively, should I show my inexperience and hastily turn around to leave? As Lumian made up his mind, the lady interrupted his thoughts and said with a smile, "Been having dreams, have you?" Lumian was hit by a bolt of lightning. His thoughts went numb, and his mind froze. After a moment or two, he managed to force a smile and asked, "Dreaming isn't unusual, is it?" The woman touched her cheek with one hand and sized Lumian up. She chuckled and said, "Lost in a misty dream, perhaps?" How could she know? Lumian's pupils dilated instantly, and his expression betrayed a hint of fear. Despite having experienced many things, he was still young, and for a moment, he couldn't control his emotions. "Stay calm, Lumian. Stay calm," he repeated to himself, trying to relax the muscles on his face, before asking, "Did you hear the tale I told those 3 foreigners last night?" The woman didn't reply. Instead, she pulled out a stack of cards from her orange purse, which sat on the chair next to her. She cast her gaze at Lumian once again and broke into a radiant smile. "Draw a card. Perhaps it can aid you in unlocking the hidden secrets of that dream." Lumian was taken aback, his guard instantly raised. He was both enticed and wary. He looked down at the card she presented him and furrowed his brows. Tarot. The card resembled the tarot cards created by Emperor Roselle for divination. The woman looked down sheepishly and offered a self-deprecating smile. "My apologies, I must have grabbed the wrong one." She swiftly returned the 22 tarot cards to her medium-sized handbag and pulled out a different deck. "This is also tarot, but it's from the minor arcana. You don't have the privilege to draw from the major arcana pack, and I don't have the authority to let you." The minor arcana consisted of 56 cards divided into 4 suits, each representing chalices, wands, swords, and pentacles. What is she talking about? Lumian was bewildered by her words. This woman was stunningly beautiful and sophisticated, yet there was an air of eccentricity about her that suggested she was not entirely sane. "Draw one," she urged, waving the minor arcana cards in her hand. "It's complimentary, so there's no cost to try. It may be the solution to your dream predicament." Lumian chuckled. "My sister once said that free things often come at the most hefty price." "That may be true," the lady said after some thought. She laid down the minor arcana card with a delicate touch, careful not to upset the glass of kirsch that sat beside it. "But as long as you don't pay, no matter what, how can I, a foreigner, expect to make you pay in Cordu?" "That's right, perhaps it's worth a try. It wasn't easy for me to get a hint about that dream. I gotta give it a shot. But what about the warlock's curse? Maybe I should get Aurora's help?" Lumian's mind raced with conflicting thoughts, and he couldn't decide what to do. The woman didn't seem to mind his hesitation. After what seemed like an eternity, Lumian finally made up his mind. Slowly, he leaned forward and reached out his right hand. Carefully, he shuffled through the stack of minor arcana cards and extracted one from the middle. 7 of Wands. The languid woman's eyes drifted towards the card. The image depicted a man in verdant attire, standing atop a mountain with a determined expression on his face. In his hand, he held a wand, poised for battle against the 6 wands representing his enemies that were attacking from the foot of the mountain. "What does this mean?" Lumian asked. The woman's lips curled into a smile. "I shall interpret it for you. It symbolizes crisis, challenge, confrontation, courage, etc. However, what really matters is that this card now belongs to you. When the time comes, you will discover its true meaning. You're giving it to me? Lumien's confusion grew with each passing moment. Could this card truly be cursed? The woman ignored his query and started to put away the remaining cards. She picked up her glass and finished the remaining kirsch in a single gulp. With graceful strides, she made her way towards the staircase on the side of Old Tavern and ascended to the second floor. It was obvious that she lived there. Lumien felt the urge to follow her, but something held him back. His thoughts were in disarray. Is this really an ordinary card? She gave it to me. Does that mean she'll never be able to use that deck again? Aurora might be able to shed some light on this. At this moment, Raimund approached Lumien. What's the matter, my friend? Nothing much. That foreigner was quite the looker, isn't she? Lumien said patronizingly. I reckon your sister Aurora is far more beautiful. Raimund then lowered his voice. Lumien, my Pepe has been gone for ages. What should we do next? Lumien, who was in a hurry to leave, pondered for a moment before answering. Firstly, we could track down an elder around your Pepe's age who's still kicking. Alternatively, we could head to the cathedral and examine the registry. But that's something to consider at a later time. Lumien remembered his recent altercation with the padre and decided it was better to avoid the cathedral, unless it was absolutely necessary. As the only cathedral in Cordu, it held significant power, even acting as a government entity. It recorded all significant events, including deaths and marriages. Before Raimund could ask any further, Lumien interjected. Let's split up and see who fits the bill. We'll inquire tomorrow. Agreed. Raimund immediately agreed. In the semi-subterranean two-story building, Aurora listened intently to Lumien's tale, her piercing gaze fixed on the wand card in his hand. It's an ordinary card, I detect no malice or enchantments. Aurora. Grande, sir. What do you make of the foreigner's intentions? How did she know of my dream? Lumien asked. Aurora shook her head. Now that she has shown us her hand, we can only wait and see. I will keep a watchful eye on her for the next few days. Oh, and take this card. It may cause change. But have no fear, I will be watching. All right. Lumien tried his best to relax. In the dead of the night, Lumien deftly tucked the wand card into the garments draping over the back of the chair, then slipped under the covers and shut his eyes. Before long, a dense, ashen mist once again enveloped his vision. Without warning, he jolted awake within his reverie. He sensed his mind clearing, and a newfound lucidity taking hold. Yet the dream world swathed in that same murky haze lingered on. Lumien's subconscious gaze darted around the room, taking in the familiar sights of the table, the chair, the bookshelf, the wardrobe, and the bed. It was his bedroom, but it was cloaked in a thin gray fog. Is this some sort of lucid dream? I'm having a lucid dream? His pupils dilated as the realization dawned on him. A lucid dream was a rare occurrence where one's mind could think and remember, like in a state of wakefulness, while still in a dream state. It was a skill that required specialized training to master. Aurora had tried various methods to induce lucid dreams in order to unravel the secret of Lumien's gray fog dream and help him eliminate the latent danger it posed, but she had failed. But now, Lumien found himself inexplicably conscious in his dream. As the shock of the situation passed, he began to consider the possibility of why this had happened. Could it be because of the tarot card that represents the Seven of Wands? That woman said it would help me unlock the secret of the dream. Therefore, its function is to allow me to enter a lucid dream state and explore the area enveloped by the gray fog? Compared to my previous impression, the gray fog seems to have faded a lot. A lot more. With these thoughts racing through his mind, Lumien rose from his chair and strode to the side of the room. He placed his hands on the table against the wall and gazed out the window, where a completely unfamiliar landscape greeted his eyes. This dream did not replicate the Cordu where he lived. Under a thin ghostly fog, a towering mountain peak caught Lumien's attention. It rose up 20 to 30 meters into the air, constructed from brownish-red stones and reddish-brown soil. Buildings surrounded the mountain, now in ruins, either fallen or charred beyond recognition. They resembled crypts, a disordered cemetery surrounding the mountain's base. The ground was marred by holes and scattered with gravel. Not a blade of grass, or a single weed, could be found in this barren wasteland. The fog in the sky thickened to an impenetrable white, with no indication of a sun. Lumion could only see as if in the dead of night, under the light of the stars. After a moment of observation, he murmured to himself, "That's it? This is the dream that's been haunting me for years." But soon he refocused his thoughts on a more practical question. Where is the dream's secret hidden? On the peak, or in one of these shattered buildings? Lumion did not rush to leave his bedroom and explore the dream. Instead, he stayed put, scanning the area from his vantage point. Suddenly, he caught sight of a figure darting through the ruins of the buildings surrounding the mountain peak. Despite the fog's thinness and the two-story house's limited height, Lumion couldn't shake the sense of its presence. He wondered if he was hallucinating. Taking a deep breath, Lumion muttered to himself, "Stay calm. Be patient. Stay calm. Be patient. From what I can see, this dream is shrouded in secrecy, and it doesn't feel entirely my own." Lumion knew that blindly exploring it could lead to danger. "Yes, I will search for that woman tomorrow, and see what information I can find. Then, I will make a decision." Lost in thought, Lumion withdrew his gaze and prepared to exit the dream to rest in peace. However, he didn't know how to wake himself up while being awake. After numerous attempts to awaken, he laid in bed and attempted to clutter his thoughts, trying to recreate the state he was in while sleeping. After an indeterminate amount of time, Lumion abruptly sat up and noticed the faint glimmer of golden sunlight filtering into the room through the curtains. "I'm finally awake. As expected, sleeping within the dream restores my disoriented state. Then I can escape." Lumion breathed a sigh of relief and whispered to himself. In that moment, a knock reverberated through the door. "Aurora!" Lumion's heart clenched, fearing the worst. "It is me." Aurora's voice infiltrated the room. Lumion sprung from the bed and rushed to the entrance. He grabbed the handle and pulled it open. Lo and behold, it was Aurora standing outside. She donned a white silk nightgown, and her long tresses of golden hair cascaded elegantly down her back. How did it go? She appeared certain that Lumion had just awoken. Lumion held nothing back, and recounted every detail that had occurred. Aurora nodded pensively. "The purpose of the card was to facilitate a lucid dream." She inquired, "What are you going to do next?" Lumion grunted curtly. "I shall grab a bite to eat before visiting the woman, and attempting to gather more information to discern her true intentions." "Very well." Aurora offered no objection. She added, "I shall also pen a letter to someone inquiring about the dream you recounted and the symbols therein." At this juncture, she glimpsed Lumion's suddenly apprehensive expression and smiled. "Fret not, I shall make adjustments. I shall not jettison everything at once. After all, I am the one who instilled in you the principle of gradual progress. Well, when you converse with that woman, do not be aggressive. Endeavor to be amicable. It is not that we are fearful of her. It is simply better to acquire another ally than an additional adversary." "Understood," Lumion replied solemnly. Cordu Old Tavern. Lumion strode into the Cordu Old Tavern and approached the bar counter. He leaned in and spoke to Maurice Binet, the tavern owner who also doubled up as a bartender. "Which chamber does the foreign madam occupy upstairs?" Old Tavern, the only inn in the village, boasted 6 rooms on the second floor for guests to rest their weary heads. Maurice Binet was not a burly man. Like most in the village, he had raven locks and blue eyes, but his nose was always red, a consequence of his heavy drinking. He was related to the church's Padre Guillaume Binet, but the two were not close, and were merely distant cousins. "Why the inquiry?" Maurice Binet inquired, his curiosity piqued. "What business would a big city woman have with a country bumpkin like you?" There was an obvious look of inquiry on his face. Maurice had a sixth sense for these things, especially when it came to men and women. Lumion scoffed. "Aren't you a country bumpkin and a hillbilly yourself?" He casually made up a reason. "The lady lost something last night. I found it this morning. Just trying to return her property." Maurice Binet didn't buy it for a second. "Is that so?" 8 out of 10 things that came out of Lumion's mouth were lies. "What else?" Do you think she'll fall for me? Lumion said, undaunted. That's true. Maurice Binet was convinced. She's in the room by the square, opposite the washrooms. After Lumion left, Maurice polished a glass, eyes tracking him. He whispered, just barely audible to Lumion, impossible? Not always. Sometimes people want to try something new. Lumion found the washroom on the second floor, the only spot of light in the dim, narrow hallway. But his eyes were drawn to the door across from it. A piece of paper hung from the brass handle, stark white against the dark redwood. Scrawled on it in incision, currently resting. Do not disturb. Lumion read the note for a few seconds. Instead of rushing forward to knock on the door, he took 2 steps back and stood against the wall. He planned to wait here until the lady came out. Life on the streets had taught him hard lessons. When an opportunity appeared, you seized it with both hands, no hesitation, no second thoughts, no fear. Otherwise it slipped through your fingers, and you were right back where you started. So he would wait as long as it took, the minutes ticking by endlessly as he ignored the eyes he felt tracking him, the whispers in his mind. He stood there without a hint of frustration, probably capable of passing off as a statue. Finally, a soft creak. The woman had changed into a pale green dress with white edges. Her brown hair was swept into a tight bun. Those light blue eyes flicked to Lumion before moving to the paper sign on the door handle, a smile dancing at the corner of her mouth. How long did you wait? She asked, not at all surprised to see him there. Lumion took a step forward and said, That's not important. He tried to keep his tone even to appear less eager. What do you want to ask? The woman said, cutting straight to the point. Lumion glanced around the empty hallway. Here. The lady replied with a smile. If you don't mind, I don't mind either. Lumion had already noticed that the other occupants of the tavern, including Ryan and Leah, were nowhere to be found. There was no one else on the second floor except for him and the woman in front of him. Lumion asked, organizing his thoughts carefully, What's the secret in that dream of mine? The lady laughed involuntarily. That's for you to answer, not me. She paused for a moment before saying, All I can say is, you'll find extraordinary power there. Extraordinary power. His pulse roared in his ears. What's the point if it's just a dream? Won't change anything out here. The woman's lips curled into a smile. Who's to say what's possible? In the realm of the extraordinary. Perhaps it can. After everything, the power I crave is there for the taking? Lumion's breath caught. The grin slid away as the lady added seriously, But danger lurks there too. Die in the dream, you die out here. Die in the dream, die for real? Lumion didn't understand, but he chose to believe it. That dream clung to Lumion like a shadow, as it had for years. But it was different somehow. Special. And Aurora's voice whispered in his memory, Careful's never a bad idea. Lumion preferred to view the situation as challenging, and the consequences as severe. He couldn't afford to underestimate the danger, or be careless. After a few seconds he asked, If I stay out? What then? Theoretically speaking, there won't be any consequences. No one will force you, the woman said thoughtfully. But as time passes, I can't be sure that the situation won't change. And the probability of things going wrong is much higher than things going right. How much higher? Lumion pressed. 90% to 10%. No, 99.99% to 0.01%. The lady added seriously, Of course, this is just my personal judgment. You can choose not to believe it. Lumion felt a wave of uncertainty wash over him, his mind racing with conflicting thoughts. Recently, I'm becoming convinced that the dream is a hidden danger. Not caring is the worst choice. But if I really want to explore it, there's a very high chance that an accident will happen without any knowledge. Should I wait for Aurora to gather more information from her pen pals before making an attempt? But if I do, Aurora definitely won't allow me to use the dream exploration to obtain extraordinary powers. Wasn't my investigation of the legend to seek extraordinary powers? It's too risky. It can lead to death. Perhaps I should do a preliminary exploration at the edge of the dream ruins to gather information, and not take the risk of entering? I can tell Aurora about the conversation, but I can't reveal the possibility of obtaining extraordinary powers. Once his thoughts had settled, Lumion gazed at the woman across from him, and asked in a low, serious tone, "Who are you exactly? Why did you give me that tarot card and the opportunity to explore the dream?" The woman smiled enigmatically. "I will tell you once you have unraveled the mystery of the dream." Once Lumion had departed from the old tavern, he found himself standing on the uneven road, uncertain of where to go next. The morning sun beat down upon him, albeit with a slight chill in the air. As he deliberated his next move, Raymond Gregg emerged from the side. "I was just looking for you." Lumion quickly regained his composure and queried, "What's the issue?" Raymond appeared taken aback. "Have you forgotten? Today, we're supposed to seek out the elderly, around the same age as my Pepe, and inquire about the legend of the warlock." Lumion groaned, pressing his hand against his forehead in agony. "Is that so? Why can't I recall? Or is this just your imagination?" Raymond's expression shifted from one of concern to one of fear. Just as he was about to inquire further and confirm whether he had imagined the events of the previous day, Lumion's face lit up with a mischievous grin. "You rascal, you're playing a joke on me again." Raymond cursed, unable to contain his annoyance. "You need to work on your cursing," Lumion chided, shaking his head in disappointment. "Even Ava can curse better than you." Ava Lizier, the beautiful daughter of Coeur de Village's renowned shoemaker Guillaume Lizier, was now a goose herder. Raymond's expression shifted as he muttered, "Ava?" He then looked at Lumion. "She's our friend, right?" Lumion nodded with a smile. "Indeed she is." The trio, along with Guillaume of the Berries and Ava's cousin Azema Lizier, were inseparable teenagers who often spent their days together. "Why don't we bring Ava on board to help us uncover the truth behind the legend?" Raymond suggested. "As you know, her father always said, why must a dowry be paid when a woman gets married? How many good families have fallen like this? It pains her to hear it. She might be relieved if she could get some treasure or reward from the investigation. I've also heard the heads of several families in the village say similar things, including our padre," Lumion added with a sly grin. "They wish their brothers would stay at home forever. Even if they get married, they won't venture out alone to establish a family. That would require them to split the assets and give them their deserving share." Lumion shot a furtive glance at Raymond and continued, "Therefore, many families prefer to let one of their children become a shepherd. This way, he won't get married and will have a certain income. Most of the time, he can support himself." Raymond's expression gradually darkened as he considered the implications of this issue. He had never thought too deeply about it before. This was precisely why he enjoyed spending time with Lumion. Although most people in the village believed that Lumion had a poor character and enjoyed lying and playing tricks, he was actually more knowledgeable than anyone his age. Raymond, on the other hand, felt like he didn't know much and spent his days in a daze, simply following through with his family's arrangements. "It's good that you know," Lumion thought to himself before skillfully steering the conversation back to their investigation. "It's too late now. We must hurry up and ask around. We will get Ava tomorrow. Yes, we can also bring Guillaume Jr. and Azema on board later. Not only will this potentially lead to gains, but it will also be a fascinating activity that can train our abilities." "Bring Guillaume Jr. and Azema too?" Raymond grumbled begrudgingly. The more people involved, the less his share of the rewards would be. Furthermore, if he included them, he would have fewer chances to win over Ava's affections. Lumion regarded him with a touch of kindness and pity in his gaze. "Silly child, do you think Ava will fall for you? Her eyebrows are very high, and she only wants to marry into a good family. She clearly has a certain favorable impression of me, a villain, yet she can control herself." In the Dirige region, having high eyebrows meant having high standards, and they wouldn't settle for just any average bloke. "My sister always said there is strength in numbers," Lumion explained simply. "Who are the old croakers that we need to visit?" "You didn't investigate?" Raymond asked in surprise. "How could I have the energy to investigate after the incident with the wand card?" Lumion smiled and quipped, "Of course I investigated. I am just testing your ability to gather information." Raymond had no doubts. "There are 9 elders who are still alive in the village. They are about the same age as my Pepe, or a little older. 6 women and 3 men. Ladies do live longer." Lumion listened quietly, deep in thought. "There's no need to visit the last 2. They're from another village and came here through marriage. Let's start with Naroka. She's the oldest and might have been an adult when the warlock incident happened. Naroka's real name wasn't actually Naroka. It was a title of respect for her. In Riston province, married women from prominent families, or those who were the actual heads of households, were entitled to the title Madam. More than that, their names were marked with an abe to proclaim their femininity, and prefixed with na to signify their authority as madams reigning over their domains. Madame Pualis's family had been in decline for a long time, and at home she dutifully deferred to her husband Beast, the provincial administrator. Therefore, she didn't have a na prefix or an abe suffix. She could only be addressed as Madam. Naroka had been widowed early on in life, and as a result, she took over the family's accounts. Despite her 2 sons coming of age, getting married, and having children of their own, she kept her hand positioned squarely on the purse strings of the family fortunes. This was a rare occurrence in Cordu, where men usually took charge of the family's affairs. In families where the father was absent, the eldest child would naturally take back the authority to manage the entire family from their mother, once they reached adulthood. Okay, Raimund acquiesced without questioning Lumien's decision. As they walked by a few buildings, Lumien spotted 4 old women basking in the sun, as they chatted casually in front of a 2-story house. They sat very close to each other, catching lice on each other's bodies, which was a form of entertainment in the countryside of the Intis Republic that served to bring people closer and express affection. Do we ask her now? Raimund hesitated, concerned that their pursuit of the truth behind the legend might spread throughout the village. Let's wait a little longer, Lumien replied solemnly, knowing that many rumors in the village were generated and spread through such gatherings. After a while, the other 3 old women left one by one, because they still had work to do at home. Good morning, Naroka. Lumien immediately walked over. Naroka's hair was grizzled, and her eyes were slightly turbid. She wore a dark dress made of rough cloth, and her hands were covered in a layer of chicken skin with obvious patches on her face. When will Aurora join us? Many people in the village miss her, Naroka asked with a smile. The men, I suppose? Lumien entered a state where he spoke his truth, while the other talked about another matter, and asked curiously, Naroka, have you really seen a real warlock? The one whose coffin 9 bulls couldn't move. Naroka's visage shifted ever so slightly. Who told you that? His Pepe came back one night to tell him. Lumien began to spout nonsense. Naroka was stunned. Can souls really return? My papa told me that Pepe had mentioned it when he was alive, Raimund interjected, unable to watch Lumien deceive the elderly woman. Naroka's expression fell. After a moment of contemplation, she spoke up. Before he passed, none of us knew he was a warlock. He acted perfectly normal, just like how you don't know that Aurora is a warlock. Lumien thought to himself. Until he suddenly died and that owl flew over. Naroka trailed off, lost in her memories. The rest of her tale mirrored the legend. Lumien pressed further. Where did that warlock reside at that time? Naroka glanced at him. It's where you and Aurora are dwelling now. After that warlock was laid to rest, the Padre and a few others ransacked the place and burned it to the ground. For 2 or 3 decades, no one dared to approach that site. Eventually the matter was forgotten. Later, Aurora came and purchased the land to rebuild the house. Our place. Lumien's heart skipped a beat. This answer was completely beyond his expectations. In a flash, he realized that there were a multitude of problems he had previously overlooked. With Aurora's knack for making money and her mysterious, unearthly abilities, why on earth would she settle down in the rural countryside of Cordu? Cities like the provincial capital Bigor, the bustling textile center of Suet, or even the capital itself, Trier, would be far better options. Even if Aurora was seeking a place with fresh air and a pristine environment, these urban centers boasted plenty of areas that would suit her needs. Aurora once told him, the best way to hide is to hide in a big city. Lumien's mind raced as he struggled to calm himself. Today, he learned that the land Aurora had chosen for their home, the land where their house stood, had once belonged to a powerful warlock. Where is the warlock buried? Raimund interjected, unable to contain his curiosity. With no hope of finding riches in Lumien's home, He could only hope that the warlock's body held some sort of valuable secret. Naroka said with amusement, this was quite the affair. It undoubtedly sounded the alarm for the padre. In the old days, 9 bulls were gathered to pull the coffin to the cemetery beside the cathedral. The padre performed a ritual to purify it. Eventually, the body was cremated, and the remains were buried in a grave. Raimund couldn't conceal his disappointment and muttered, I see. Why do you inquire? Naroka scrutinized Raimund's face before questioning. Lumion cackled and spun a tale that sounded more like a fabrication. We seek the warlock's treasure. Kid, don't waste your time daydreaming, Naroka warned. Understood, Lumion replied meekly. Lumion and Raimund bade Naroka farewell and hit the road toward the village square. There ain't no hope, Lumion. None at all, Raimund muttered, his spirits sinking as they circled a building. Indeed, all that could have been burned has been burned. All that could have been taken was taken decades ago, Lumion replied, nodding in agreement. Despite the bleakness of their situation, Lumion wasn't disappointed thanks to the opportunity in his dream. Raimund agreed. Aye, you're right. Of all the tales, only that blasted owl still remains. Lumion's eyes lit up as he turned his gaze to the forest beyond the village. Owl, he murmured. Raimund recoiled in horror and added hastily, but it must have died years ago. He wasn't one for consorting with the likes of owls and other evil creatures. Down south in Intis, owls, nightingales and ravens were thought to be sinister beings that served demons, stealing away human souls and bringing only misfortune. Guillaume Binet felt fortunate that the foreigners had not divulged his affair with Madame Pualis, the administrator's wife, to anyone. He was still unaware of this. Despite their speed, Lumion was quicker. Just as Pons spoke, Lumion pivoted and dashed away. He was familiar with the padre's character and methods. Previously, a villager had accused Guillaume Binet of having multiple mistresses and embezzling offerings from the eternal blazing Sunday. He had also bullied others relentlessly in the village, hardly behaving like a man of the cloth. Subsequently, the villager had mysteriously died one afternoon. Thud thud thud. Lumion raced like the wind. Wait for your papa, eh? Attends ton père. Pons shouted while chasing him. His pace was not sluggish either. The thugs pursued closely behind him. Instead of fleeing along the main road, Lumion darted into the nearest house. The family was preparing lunch in the kitchen when they suddenly saw a stranger burst in. With a swoosh, Lumion darted past them and leaped out of the kitchen window at the back. By the time Pons and his cronies entered, the homeowner had regained his senses. He stood up to confront them and inquired, What is going on? What are all of you doing? Get out of the way, old man. Pons shoved the homeowner aside with force, but it slowed him down. When they reached the window and jumped out, Lumion had already vanished into another trail. After pursuing him for a while, they lost sight of Lumion entirely. Sacrebleu CSGN's foes. Pons spat on the roadside. Outside the semi-subterranean 2-story abode, Lumion gasped for breath before finally opening the door and entering the house, as though nothing had happened. 1 2 3 4, 2 2 3 4. A series of rhythmic shouts reverberated in his ears. Lumion gazed at the empty space on the other side of the kitchen and observed Aurora's blonde hair tied in a ponytail. She wore a flaxen shirt, tight white pants and dark sheepskin boots, leaping around and drenched in sweat. In Cordoue, the kitchen occupied most of the space on the first floor, serving as the family's core. Cooking and dining occurred here, as did receiving guests. She's exercising again. Lumion was accustomed to Aurora's eccentricities and was unfazed by her exercise regimen. Aurora often did strange things without giving any reason when probed. At the very least, exercising is beneficial, and it's quite a feast for the eyes. Lumion observed silently. After a while, Aurora stopped and squatted to turn off the black tape recorder. She took the white towel from Lumion and instructed him, as she wiped the sweat from her forehead. Remember, we have combat practice this afternoon. I have to study and learn combat. Aren't you demanding too much of me? Lumion grumbled nonchalantly. Aurora glanced at him, smiling and retorted, You must remember that our objective is the comprehensive development of the 5 educations, one of morality, intellect, physique, aesthetics, and labor. The more she spoke, the happier she became, as if recollecting something beautiful or amusing. I have already failed moral education, Lumion muttered under his breath. He queried, what kind of combat? One of the things he failed to comprehend was that Aurora, who seemed delicate and frail, was an expert in combat. She mastered numerous fighting techniques and could easily overpower him. Aurora pondered seriously, leaned forward slightly, and gazed into Lumion's eyes. She then laughed heartily and declared, self-defense. Ha! Lumion exclaimed in astonishment. Isn't that supposed to be for girls? Aurora stood tall and shook her head gravely, saying sincerely, boys must protect themselves when they are out. Who says boys don't encounter perverts? The smile on her lips was no longer hidden. Lumion was unsure if his sister was joking or serious, so he remained silent as he retrieved the white towel and headed towards the stairs. Suddenly, he felt something tighten under his foot, as if he had tripped over an obstacle. He stumbled forward. In midair, Lumion hastily contracted his abs, extended his arm, and leaned on the chair beside him. He somersaulted and barely landed on his feet. Aurora retracted her leg and chuckled. One of the fundamental combat principles is to be vigilant at all times. One cannot be complacent. Remember that, my novice brother? Her right hand had already clutched Lumion's back, but when she saw that he had regained control of his body, she let go. It's because I trust you too much, Lumion grumbled. He contemplated the matter and realized that this trust was meaningless. He had lost count of how many times he had been at the mercy of Aurora. Aurora coughed and restrained her expression. How did it go with that woman? Lumion provided a brief summary of their conversation before declaring, I intend to wait for your friends to respond before delving into the dream. Smart decision, Aurora affirmed. Lumion changed the subject. What's for lunch? We still have some leftover toast from this morning. I'll roast 4 more lamb chops for you, Aurora replied after contemplating for a moment. What about you? Lumion inquired. Aurora casually said, I'll just have truffle bamboo chicken shreds topped with some cheese and onion soup. I tried it last time and found it to be quite. Before she could finish speaking, she suddenly froze. The next moment, she raised her hands to cover her ears. The muscles on her face gradually contorted, making her appear somewhat ferocious. Lumion observed silently, his eyes filled with anxiety and apprehension. After a while, Aurora exhaled deeply and returned to her usual self. Her forehead was drenched in sweat once more. What happened? Lumion asked. Aurora smiled and responded, The ringing in my ears is acting up again. You know that I have this old problem. Lumion didn't probe further. Instead, he said, All right, then I'll prepare lunch. Rest well. Every time this occurred, his yearning for extraordinary abilities grew stronger, as it became a pressing matter. As the night settled in, Lumion finished dealing with his neighbors who had come to borrow the oven. He made his way up to the second floor, entering the room that served as Aurora's study. In Cordu, many folks were destitute and couldn't afford their own ovens or large stoves. When they needed to toast bread or smoke meat, they had to borrow it from others and use it on the spot. Aurora had always been lenient and accommodating when it came to this. Anyone could borrow her oven, but they had to pay the fuel costs or bring their own coal and wood. Currently, she had donned her white silk nightdress and was curled up in a reclining chair. Her focus solely on the book she held under the bright battery-powered lamp on the desk. Lumion didn't wish to disturb her, so he nonchalantly pulled out a thinner book from the bookshelf and took a seat in the corner. Hidden Veil. What kind of magazine is this? Lumion pondered, gazing at the cover that was adorned with cryptic symbols. He swiftly flipped through the pages, and the more he read, the more he was taken aback. This magazine delved into the very existence of the human soul. It discussed how all beings had a spirit, and through secret methods of communication between different spirits, one could obtain various kinds of aid. Even if one wasn't devout, even if they only attended the eternal blazing sun cathedral to pray and partake in mass occasionally, 2 words couldn't help but flash through Lumion's mind: sacrilege, taboo. As a warlock who would undoubtedly be burned at the stake by the Inquisition if her true identity was exposed, It was customary for Aurora to have such books at her residence. However, Lumion could tell that this magazine had received the government's permission for publication. Can such a thing be openly published? Didn't they say that publication censorship had always been very strict? Or is this a fake permit? Lumion looked up at Aurora and inquired, "Is this a prohibited magazine?" Aurora took her eyes off her book and glanced at her brother. She responded in a nonchalant tone. In the past, it was underground fiction. Later on, for some reason, it cleared the censors and was officially published. The Eternal Blazing Sun Church actually didn't care and tacitly agreed. Fiction. Lumion was taken aback by his sister's choice of words. Of course it's fiction. You're not taking it seriously, are you? Aurora laughed. If what's written is true, do you think it can still be published? If you follow the method written on it, other than making yourself mentally weak and neurotic, there won't be any additional gains. Yes, there will occasionally be something real, but without the corresponding ritual language, it'll be a waste of effort no matter how hard you try. This was the professional evaluation of a warlock. All right, Lumion couldn't hide his disappointment. I just find it strange that this can be published. Aurora took a deep breath, her puffed-up cheeks accentuating her pondering. I don't know why either. Perhaps it's because the world has been seeing an influx of supernatural events lately, and it's becoming increasingly difficult to conceal them. The public is becoming more aware of their existence, and the government is slowly easing its grip on such topics. That's why books like these are being published. Intrier, Psychic, Lotus, and Arcane are the most popular magazines. I have them all on my bookshelf. If you want to come up with more realistic stories for the tavern, you should give them a read. Oui. Lumion responded eagerly, his interest piqued. Simultaneously, he let out a wistful sigh deep in his heart. Aurora's hoard of books was truly impressive and diverse. Thanks to these tomes and Aurora's occasional elucidations, Lumion, a lad who had forsaken his schooling, had managed to acquire a reasonable comprehension of the world, continent, and nation he called home. The world was divided into two great continents, one to the north and one to the south, separated by the treacherous Berserk Sea, where raging hurricanes battered any who dared to sail its waters. But the truly mysterious lands lay to the east and west, on the legendary eastern and western continents. No one had ever set foot there, and some wondered if they even existed at all. Lumion and Aurora lived in the Intis Republic, a land situated in the heart of the northern continent. It was a nation bordered by the Fog Sea to the west, the Faesac Empire to the north, and the Hornacis mountain range, and the Lone Kingdom to the east. To the south lay the Fainapotter Kingdom, Lemberg and Mason. The small countries nestled between the Fainapotter Kingdom and the Lone Kingdom, such as Seeger, together with Lemberg and Mason, were collectively known as the countries of the south-central region. They shared a common faith in the god of knowledge and wisdom. The southern continent had already fallen under the dominion of the various powers of the northern continent. Whether it was the Balam Empire, the Paz Kingdom, the Hajindi Kingdom, or any of the other nations, they had all but lost their autonomy. Yet still, a fierce resistance against colonization burned in the hearts of the conquered. In addition to the Berserk Sea dividing the northern and southern continents, there were other great seas. The Fog Sea to the west of the Intis Republic, the Sonia Sea to the east of the Lone Kingdom, the North Sea to the north of the Faesac Empire, and the Polar Sea to the south of the southern continent. They were collectively known as the Five Seas. Of all the nations of the northern continent, the Lone Kingdom was the strongest, with the Intis Republic close behind. The Faesac Empire, defeated in the last war, had fallen to fourth place. The Fainapotter Kingdom had risen to third place. And among the countries of the south-central region, Lemberg reigned supreme. Compared to the simple folk in Cordu who only knew of the Intis Republic, the Fainapotter Kingdom, and Lemberg, Lumion was practically a cartographer. It was no surprise really, considering the Cordu village shepherds only traveled to their neighboring kingdoms of Fainapotter and Lemberg. They only had a limited understanding of these lands. The people in the northern villages of the Darige region were just as provincial. Other than the surrounding settlements, they could only name Trier, Suet, and a few other metropolitans. Lumion was often baffled. How did Aurora come by such vast knowledge? All the textbooks he read were penned by Aurora, and all his practice exams were prepared by her. Aurora had an answer for every question in the books he read, but what stunned him even more was her expertise in various forms of combat. It was simply mind-boggling that a woman in her 20s could accumulate so much wisdom. Some people couldn't amass that much knowledge, even after living 50 or 60 years. Could it be that these are the building blocks of a true warlock? Lumion looked up again and gazed at Aurora, lost in thought. As Aurora patted her cheeks while reading, she hardly seemed like a scholar or a warlock. Aurora caught Lumion's gaze and demanded, "What are you ogling at?" Lumion quickly changed the subject. "Last time you mentioned that I possessed the knowledge required to pass the college entrance examination?" Aurora pondered for a moment before responding. "In theory, you could gain admission to any university, but since I never took that particular exam, I can't say for certain what questions will be asked. Roselle sure did a number on the populace. Sigh, I guess it's a good thing." Undoubtedly, Emperor Roselle's reign spawned the college entrance examination, and it has remained a fixture of academic life to this day. Aurora's mind suddenly shifted gears. She shot Lumion a sly grin and inquired, "Why did you not make your usual stop at the tavern today to regale the patrons with your tales?" "I'm not truly an alcoholic," Lumion replied while flipping through his magazine. "Reading at home is equally enjoyable, and it helps to calm my nerves and ease my mind," Lumion silently added. Aurora nodded and glanced over at Lumion's spot in the corner of the room. "Why are you sitting so far away, putting on an act of pitifulness, weakness, and helplessness? Come closer. You need proper lighting to read at night. Otherwise, your eyes will suffer." "Aurora sure has a way with words," Lumion mused. "Although I understand the meaning behind pitifulness, weakness, and helplessness, it's still an odd combination." Supposedly used to her idiosyncrasies by now, Lumion retrieved a chair and moved closer to the desk where Aurora sat. The two of them spent the evening reading in silence, occasionally chatting, as the sound of their breathing mingled with the rustling of pages and the soft breeze that wafted in from outside the window, peaceful and soothing. As he bid Aurora good night, Lumion slipped back into his quarters. He peeled off his coat and draped it across the back of the chair. He couldn't risk bringing the wand card to bed with him. That would only raise suspicion, and his sister had sworn to keep a watchful eye on him at all times. Just as he was about to approach the bed, Lumion froze, his heart skipping a beat. His sharp eyes darted around the room, and he adjusted the chair that was usually positioned at a diagonal angle to face the window. Then, he crawled into bed and extinguished the kerosene lamp resting on the cabinet next to him. As he drifted off into the depths of slumber, Lumion was suddenly startled awake. The bedroom was shrouded in a dense gray fog. Lumion, who was already mentally prepared, calmly took in his surroundings and made a realization. The chair that he had meticulously arranged before retiring for the night was still positioned at an angle in his dream, just as it had been in reality in the past. This suggested that the dream world he had entered was not an exact reflection of reality. Perhaps it was a manifestation of his deepest subconscious desires. Although Lumion couldn't decipher its meaning, he knew that it was something to be remembered. He walked over to the window, placed his hands on the sill, and gazed out. The mountain made of brownish-red stones and reddish-brown soil, and the collapsed buildings that surrounded it, were still present. The eerie silence of the place was deafening. Time quickly passed. After much contemplation, Lumion made a firm decision. He would embark on a preliminary exploration of the area tonight. His past life on the streets had turned him into a man of action. He didn't rush downstairs, however. Instead, he opened the cabinet and began to pile on clothes. He didn't need them to keep warm, but he wanted to increase his defensibility in this way. He grabbed a cotton shirt, cotton pants, and a leather jacket, stretching his body to feel the fit. Any more clothing would only hinder his agility, and that was crucial in a situation like this. As he adjusted to his current state, Lumion had a sudden thought. "This is my dream. Can't I get whatever I want?" With that intention, he muttered to himself, "I want a breastplate and a revolver. I want a breastplate and a revolver." The room was still shrouded in a thin gray fog. "This won't do. This dream is special. His disappointment was palpable, but he quickly regained his composure and made his way to the bedroom door. Stepping out into the corridor, he found himself in complete darkness. It was murky and dim. Lumion pushed open the door to Aurora's bedroom and then her study. The layout was slightly different from reality, but he recognized it immediately. The biggest difference, of course, was that Aurora was nowhere to be found. The entire scene was frozen in shades of gray. The first floor was no different. Lumion scanned his surroundings, searching for a weapon to defend himself. He knew his home better than anyone else, and quickly found two viable options. The first was a 2-meter-long fork made of steel. Aurora had said that it was effective and outstanding, as long as the target didn't have a long-range weapon. The second was a sharp, iron-black hand axe. Why not both? Lumion couldn't help but think of Aurora's oft-repeated phrase, but he quickly dismissed the idea. Today was all about reconnaissance. He needed to be sly, hidden in the shadows. Lugging around a cumbersome weapon would only hinder his movements and give him away. Taking a deep breath, Lumion stooped down to retrieve the axe. He rose to his full height and set off towards the door, barely visible in the misty haze. With a deft hand, he opened the door, not making a sound. As Lumion stepped out the door, he felt as though he was transported to another world. Before him lay no longer the familiar Cordu, but a dark red mountain peak and the collapsed buildings surrounding it. Together they formed a strange ruin. The fog in the sky was thick and pale, making it difficult for light to enter. The ground was shattered, and there were many rocks. Lumion gripped his axe tightly and inched forward carefully, his heart pounding in his chest. Along the way he couldn't find a place to hide. There were no weeds or trees. Lumion walked in fear, his every sense on high alert. All he could do was hunch his back and comfort himself. At the very least, if there was any danger in this area, it would be obvious at a glance. He could discover it in advance. Finally, he arrived at the ruins, a half-collapsed building that had been wrecked by fire. Lumion surveyed the area for a moment and tentatively confirmed that there were no other creatures lurking about. Satisfied with his assessment, he cautiously made his way inside the building, being mindful of the charred wood that could fall at any moment from midair. As he searched the room, his eyes landed on a broken pot in the corner of the house. There was a hint of gold shining through the cracks. Lumion approached the pot slowly and realized that it was a gold coin. Can it be true? There's actually treasure in the ruins of my dream? He picked up the gold coin and wiped it against his body. The patterns on the surface of the coin were revealed. The coin featured a man's portrait carved on the front. His face was thin, and his hair was parted 30 to 70. There was a mustache on his lips, and his gaze was rather firm. On the back was a bunch of sweet iris flowers surrounding the number 20. Lumion recognized the man depicted on the coin. It was none other than the first president of the Intis Republic, Levanx. It's actually a Louis d'Or. Lumion was rather surprised. Firstly, he couldn't believe that the currency in this strange dream ruin was actually the currency of the Intis Republic in reality. And secondly, he had casually picked up something as valuable as a Louis d'Or. He knew that in the present day, the legal currencies of the Intis Republic were Vril d'Or and Capit. 1 Vril d'Or was equivalent to 100 Capit. Capit existed in the form of copper coins and silver coins. The copper coins were divided into 3 categories: 1 Capit, 5 Capit, 10 Capit, while the silver coins had the denominations of 20 Capit and 50 Capit. Vril d'Or could be found in the form of silver coins, gold coins, or banknotes. In silver coins, there were denominations of 1, 5, and 10 Vril d'Or, while gold coins came in 5, 10, 20, 40, and 50 denominations. The denominations of banknotes were even more varied, ranging from 5, 20, 50, 100, 200, 500, 1,000 Vril d'Or. In reality, the people of Intis still clung to the old currency units. For example, the most widely used 5 Capit copper coins were known as Lick. Similarly, gold coins worth 20 Vril were commonly referred to as Louis d'Or. In the old currency era, Louis d'Or had been known as Roselle, but after the Republic was established, the name was changed to Louis d'Or in order to erase Emperor Roselle's influence. As Lumion understood it, even in the rural area of Cordu, A Louis d'Or could sustain a poor family with fields for an entire month. He knew that without Aurora's high income, he might never have even seen what a Louis d'Or looked like. In fact, in the entire village of Cordoue, only the siblings and the family of the administrator had ever seen or owned a Louis d'Or. To any villager, this Louis d'Or was an incredibly valuable gain. Unfortunately, this is just a dream. Lumion couldn't help but feel a pang of disappointment. This was something ordinary, making it unlikely he could bring it out of the dream. But even so, he handled the Louis d'Or with great care and respect. Having spent much of his life wandering, he knew the value of every kopek. And he knew that 1 Louis d'Or was equivalent to 2,000 kopek, which was equal to 1 gold pound in the Lone Kingdom, though slightly less. According to the papers he had read, 24 vril d'Or could only be exchanged for 1 gold pound. Lumion continued his search for any written information that could shed light on the ruins and their history. He wanted to see if this place corresponded to a certain location in reality, and whether a village in the Intis Republic had been transported into this dream world. The appearance of the Louis d'Or had only fueled his curiosity. As Lumion moved cautiously through the ruined building, his eyes fell upon a spot where a stove had once stood, now stained with a dark red color. Blood. His pupils dilated as he quickly made a guess. Immediately after, he made a judgment. Although it wasn't fresh, it hadn't yet turned black. It looked as though it had just dripped there 2 or 3 days prior. Or perhaps even more recently. As his heart began to race, Lumion suddenly felt the light around him dim, as if something had silently blocked the light filtering through the dense fog from above. The memory of past attacks flooded Lumion's mind like a turbulent wave, causing him to react instinctively. Without a thought, he lunged forward and wrapped his body in midair, rolling on the ground to avoid any potential danger. Thump! A loud thump echoed through the air, as something heavy fell behind him. Lumion quickly rolled to the left side of the dilapidated stove, using a nearby rock to leverage himself around. As he rose to his feet, axe at the ready, he saw an additional figure standing where he had just been moments before. The dim light made it difficult to discern whether it was human or some kind of humanoid creature. The figure hunched in front of Lumion was unlike anything he had ever seen before. It was a monster, with no clothes or shoes to speak of. Its skin had been peeled off, revealing the red muscles, blood vessels, and yellowed fascia beneath. Sticky liquid dripped from its body, yet it didn't fall to the ground. It was a monster. Its eyes seemed to be embedded in its face, and its mouth hung open with all its might, revealing uneven teeth and a long drool of saliva. Despite all the ghost stories Lumion had fabricated in the past, he never expected to encounter such an evil spirit in real life. Whoosh! The stench of blood filled Lumion's nostrils, as the panting of the monster filled his ears. Instinct took over Lumion as he dodged to the side, narrowly avoiding the blood-red monster's attack. Lumion knew that he had Aurora's guidance and years of experience fighting on the streets to thank for his quick reflexes. Without them, he might not have been able to react in time. Taking a deep breath to calm himself, Lumion charged after the monster that had pounced on him. With his sharp axe in hand, he swung with all his might and struck the monster in the back. Bang! Lumion's axe felled the monster mid-turn, sending a spray of pus and blood in every direction. Without a moment's hesitation, Lumion knelt down on one knee and raised his axe again, ready to strike another blow. Bang! 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 Again and again, Lumion swung his axe with precision and force, each strike slicing through the monster's flesh and leaving deep, wide cracks on the back of its head, neck, and back. Finally, the monster lay still, defeated by Lumion's fierce barrage of blows. Huff! Puff! You don't act as terrifyingly as you look. Lumion heaved a sigh of relief, his voice tinged with a hint of mockery. He wiped his face with his left hand, then used it to wipe off the blood on his other hand. Is this monster's bodily fluids poisonous? For the time being, there's no pain of the fluids eating at me. Lumion began to worry about another problem. Just as Lumion mustered up his courage and was about to search the monster's body, he was caught off guard by a sudden movement. The skinless, blood-colored monster propped itself up with both hands and bounced up again, as if it were still alive. It isn't dead yet? Despite being slashed to such a state, it seemed that the monster was still alive. Lumion was shocked and afraid. Fear and trepidation took hold of Lumion. If Lumion had been facing normal humans, beasts, or monsters, he would not have been so afraid, even if he couldn't defeat them. But this monster in front of him seemed unkillable, rendering Lumion's every move useless. Taking advantage of the monster's brief disorientation, Lumion made a quick decision. He propped himself up with his feet, exerted strength on his knees, and ran wildly. Thud, thud, thud. He ran with all his might, but he could feel the monster's breath on the back of his neck, and the sound of its heavy breathing echoed in his ears. The monster followed closely behind him. Despite his fear, Lumion gritted his teeth and allowed his fear to push himself to run even faster, surpassing his previous limits. To his delight, he soon realized that the distance between him and the monster was no longer shortening. Thud, thud, thud. Lumion finally reached his semi-subterranean two-story building as he pulled open the unlocked door and jumped inside. With a loud clang, he slammed the door shut and quickly made his way to the stove, where he picked up a steel fork that was leaning against the wall. Then he focused on the door. But then, he heard the sound of the monster's running footsteps fading away. He waited, but the monster didn't try to slam through the door. It knows that I'm lying in ambush here? Lumion couldn't believe that the monster had higher intelligence. He slowly moved towards the window near the door and peeked out. Suddenly, a face appeared on the glass, a bloody, skinless mess with uneven teeth. Lumion froze for a moment, his heart almost stopping. To Lumion's surprise, the monster didn't try to break the glass or attack him. Instead, it simply met his gaze. Lumion snapped out of his daze and retreated, brandishing the long fork with both hands. The monster left the window. Lumion watched cautiously, observing its movements as it lingered in the light fog for a while before finally retreating back to the ruins. Lumion was at a loss. He had been prepared to trap the monster and make a quick escape from the dream, but the creature had simply left without attacking. After some thought, a possibility occurred to Lumion. Perhaps the monster is afraid to enter my house? Yes, there's no signs of damage to the house at all. In the dream, this is an absolutely safe place. With this realization, Lumion felt a sense of relief wash over him. Lumion was hit with a wave of exhaustion the next second. The short chase had taken more out of him than an entire afternoon of combat training. Lumion made his way upstairs to his bedroom, clutching the pitchfork and axe tightly in his hands. As he lay down on the bed, Lumion attempted to fall asleep. Lumion opened his eyes, feeling disoriented and groggy. Outside the curtains it was still dark, and the room was shrouded in shadows. For a moment, Lumion couldn't tell if he was still in the dream world, or if he had somehow returned to reality. But then he noticed the lack of gray fog, and the fact that he was wearing his pajamas, and he realized that he must have woken up. I woke up early because of the fright, Lumion muttered to himself, subconsciously patting the pocket of his pajamas. But when he didn't feel the weight of the Louis d'Or, he felt a pang of disappointment. It confirmed another fact. That money couldn't be brought out of the dream world. Lumion took a deep breath and composed himself, his thoughts turning to a serious problem. How was he supposed to deal with that unkillable monster? While Lumion knew that he could bypass the area and enter stealthily, he also knew that this was not a long-term solution. The possibility of encountering similar monsters in the future was always there, and he couldn't afford to risk his life by being unprepared. The azure sky was speckled with fluffy white clouds, gently blown by the spring breeze that carried with it the fragrance of the forest. White geese pecked at the lush grasses, grazing beside the meandering river. A lass, draped in a grayish-white frock, stood intently observing them with a long pole in her hand. Her countenance was bathed in the golden sun rays, exposing her thin downy hair. The girl's brown tresses, elegantly tied in a white cloth, revealed her youthful and lively features. Glancing at Lumion sitting under a tree by the river, Ava Lizier scrunched her face slightly. Are we not here to discuss which legend is easier to investigate? Why have you turned into a stone statue reminiscent of the ones from the cathedral? Ava was the daughter of Guillaume Lizier the shoemaker. Being one of the few youths in the village, she had an amiable relationship with Lumion and Raymond. I'm contemplating a problem, Lumion responded, still gazing at the white geese and the rippling waters. What problem? Inquired Raymond Gregg, who was tending to Ava's flock of geese. Lumion pondered before replying. What if you come across a beast with a thick hide that your weapon cannot pierce? What would you do? Obviously, I'd find a way to flee. The mountains are teeming with wild beasts. We need not hunt it, Ava replied, feeling that there was nothing to worry about. Lumion grunted in disagreement. What if that beast is exceptionally rare, and the lords in the city adore it, and are willing to pay 100 louis d'or for its carcass? 100 louis d'or, 2,000 vril d'or. Raymond breathed heavily. He had never seen a louis d'or before, nor had he used one. His instinct was to convert it into vril d'or first. With such a hefty sum of money, he could start a small business in Darige. He wouldn't have to fret over shepherding anymore. He quickly thought and suggested, borrow a shotgun? The beast's skin cannot be penetrated, Lumion rejected flatly, even though she knew the prey was just a figment of imagination. With no value in the real world, she couldn't help herself. Is it a powerful creature? Fierce. Lumion paused to consider her question. It's about as fierce as me. That was all the assurance he needed to continue his hunt. Raymond, who had been holding his breath, let out a sigh of relief. Good. Go back to the village and round up some people. We'll surround the beast and drain its strength. Once it's down, we'll tie it up. He knew that Lumion could fight, but that was all. In that case, we can only expect to get 10 louis d'or. Or even less, Lumion reminded. Ava, with her stunning aqua-blue eyes, had an idea. I've seen them hunt before. Maybe we can dig a trap and make it fall. That way, we won't have to worry about it getting back up. Lumion nodded his approval. That's a good idea. Realizing that Ava and Raymond had little to offer in terms of planning, Lumion took control of the conversation. Which legend do you think we should target next? He asked. Ava shook her head. Neither of them fit the bill. They're either centuries old, or were only seen by one person, who is long dead. Raymond agreed. That's right. If you don't ask the right folks, how would you know there ain't no clues? Lumion clicked his tongue and chuckled. You lot don't have any grit. If you want to give up at the first sign of trouble, you might as well be tending geese and sheep for the rest of your days. Ava and Raymond were fuming at Lumion's words. When it came to riling people up, Lumion was one of the best in all of Cordoue. Ava blurted out. I don't think any of them are suitable, 'cause there are more suitable ones. What is it? Lumion's eyes sparked with interest. As soon as Ava spoke, she regretted it. But she'd been planning to bring up this issue. She just didn't want to reveal it to Lumion and Raymond so easily. After a few seconds of tense silence, she glared at Lumion. There's a real witch in the village. Who is it? Lumion's heart tightened. Could it be Aurora? If Ava found out that Aurora was a warlock, he and Aurora would have to flee Cordoue and go somewhere else to avoid the Inquisition's wrath. Ava looked around nervously and lowered her voice. Madame Pualis, the administrator's wife and the padre's mistress? Lumion found it hard to believe. Are you serious? If Pualis was indeed a witch, how could Lumion have missed it when he found out about the lady's affair with the padre? No way. Raymond was exceptionally surprised. Ava tiptoed and looked in the direction of the village entrance. I'm not certain, but Charlie, the administrator's valet, let it slip once. He told me that Madame Pualis is a soul messenger who can talk to the dead and help them return home. He also said that she can create mystical concoctions and charms. Lumion listened intently but remained skeptical. With magazines like Psychic, Lotus, and Hidden Veil flooding the market, it wasn't uncommon for the administrator's wife to be familiar with such terms and trick the servants and villagers. We should go to the cathedral and snitch, said Raymond, his eyes wide with excitement. Lumion paused before responding. If Charlie knows that Madame Pualis is a witch, then the administrator should know as well, right? We agreed, Ava. Lumion continued. Madame Pualis is also the padre's mistress. If we go to the cathedral and snitch on her, we will probably be sent straight to the administrator. What? Madame Pualis is the padre's mistress? Ava and Raymond were shocked. I saw it with my own eyes. Lumion chuckled. Pretend you don't know. Don't tell anyone. Otherwise, you might disappear one day. Ava and Raymond agreed in unison, their expressions unusually solemn, their fear of the padre and the witch intertwined. If we can confirm that Madame Pualis is a witch, we'll go to Dirige and tell the bishop at Mass, Lumian assured them. Raymond nodded fervently. They had to be sure before they snitched. Otherwise, they would be in trouble if Madame Pualis was innocent. After discussing these matters, Lumian, who didn't want to waste any time, stood up and said to Ava and Raymond, I'm off back to my studies. Otherwise, Aurora would be chasing me with a wooden stick. You two take care of the geese. Okay. Raymond was thrilled at the prospect of being left alone with Ava. Ava looked displeased. As Lumian approached Cordu, he began to hide his tracks, constantly paying attention to whether there was anyone nearby. He had to be careful, especially now that the padre and his crew were on his tail. According to his observations, the padre Guillaume Benet was not one to forgive easily. He made his way towards Old Tavern, trying to stay as inconspicuous as possible. Suddenly, he heard the sound of bells ringing in the distance. Lumian turned to see Ryan, Leah, and Valentine approaching Naroka and the others. The bells on Leah's veil and boots rang clearly and melodiously. They've been wandering around the village for the past 2 days, chatting with people and asking questions. I don't know what they are up to. Lumian was puzzled and a little wary, as he thought about the deserted town square and the shepherd, Pierre Barry, who had returned to the village unexpectedly. Lumian knew that something was about to go down. Is something about to happen in the village? He needed to speak to Aurora, his smart and knowledgeable sister, and get her opinion. Lumian managed to sneak into Old Tavern and spotted the woman who had given him the tarot card sitting in her usual spot, eating. Lumian leaned over and took a glance. Omelette au lard? Don't you find it a little too cloying? In Dirige, this dish was the go-to for ordinary folks to impress their fancy guests. Lumian, however, had his doubts about it being too greasy and heavy for city women. The lady savored a slow bite of the golden omelette and shut her eyes to savor it. It's a real gem. It's got this local flavor that's just exquisite. You're having lunch so early? Lumian asked, seated across from her. The lady's light blue eyes betrayed a hint of exhaustion as she smiled and replied, It's breakfast. What time is it? Lumian didn't dare let slip his thoughts. He scanned the nearly empty Old Tavern and hushed his voice. I saw a ruin in my dream and came across a monster. Oh, the lady didn't bat an eye. Her expression even held a hint of teasing mischief that Lumian couldn't quite decipher. Lumian composed himself and recounted his tale. How do I vanquish this monster? The lady beamed and countered. Is it dead or alive? It's still kicking. I can't seem to kill it. Lumian trailed off, then answered on reflex. He pondered in earnest for a beat before replying slowly. I can feel it breathing. So it's gotta be alive. If it's still breathing, then try harder. Lop off its head. Or pour oil and light it up. Bury it alive even. Who knows? It might just kick the bucket, the lady suggested nonchalantly while relishing her meal. When you've exhausted all options and still come up short, then come to me. But I'm not your nanny who'll coddle you through every little problem. If you want to learn, you've got to figure it out on your own. She's quite the charmer. Lumian wasn't crestfallen or dispirited. It seemed the lady was hinting that she'd lend a hand if things got truly dire. And a monster like this wasn't even worth mentioning. But what's trivial can be a real headache. Lumian felt a migraine coming on. He resolved to heed the lady's advice. He'd start by trying to behead it, burn it, bury it alive, and anything else he could think of. As Lumian left Old Tavern, he resumed his surreptitious ways, skulking down the path he always took home. Sure enough, he spotted one of Pons Benet's goons hiding behind a tree, spying on passers-by. The padre doesn't know when to quit. Lumian muttered to himself. But Lumian couldn't retaliate. His personal abilities were limited, and he couldn't risk bringing attention from the Church of the Eternal Blazing Sun in the Dirige region. The Inquisition would be all over him in a heartbeat, which could spell doom for Aurora. Unless Lumian was pushed to the brink and had no other choice but to abandon the town, his only option was to expose the padre's unsavory activities and force him to retire to a cloister. But that was easier said than done. Lumian needed to be careful and cunning. just like when he let the foreigners discover the Padre's affair with Madame Pualis. Lumion didn't want to make a big fuss about it. He knew that Beast, the administrator and territorial judge, was a stickler for his reputation. If Lumion brought Madame Pualis's predicament to light, he wouldn't get any favors in return. No, it would be more likely that Beast would turn on him, filled with bile and vitriol. That would leave Lumion with little choice but to flee Cordoue, with both the Padre and administrator hot on his heels. He proceeded with caution, taking a detour through a narrow alley that weaved between several houses. Along the way, Lumion relied on his wits and the surroundings to conceal himself. He ducked behind walls, slipped through doors, and took refuge behind trees whenever necessary. As he neared the end of the alley, he heard the sound of voices. "Guillaume, why we waste our time chasing that kid all day? Let's go to Aurora's house tonight and catch him. We have the advantage of numbers, and Aurora's fightin' skills ain't enough to stop us. We can even get reinforcements from the city if needed. Guillaume, the Padre is here too." Lumion stopped, retreating into the corner to eavesdrop on their conversation, to see what plans the Padre had for him. Guillaume Benet's voice was mesmerizing. "Surely, you don't think that's the extent of Aurora's capabilities? I wouldn't be surprised if she had supernatural abilities beyond mine." "Ah." Pons Benet was obviously surprised. "A witch, you say? Guillaume, maybe it's time for you to venture to Dirige and seek out the Inquisition. If you can catch a true witch, the Church will undoubtedly grant you a great reward. And with that, you may finally attain the extraordinary strength you've been yearning for all these years." "Imbecile," Guillaume Benet scolded his brother. "Don't you know what's happening in this village? The Inquisition has noses like hounds. They won't overlook any anomalies. When the time comes, we'll be in hot water. Even if Aurora desires to deal with us, I have other solutions," he said. "We mustn't arouse the Inquisition's attention. So what is happening in the village now?" Lumion took this seriously and was curious. Combining his observations of abnormalities, he sensed that something terrible was brewing and developing in the village, like a turbulent undercurrent under the calm sea. To Lumion's dismay, Pons Benet didn't elaborate on the topic. Instead, he focused on something else. "Do you have any way to deal with a witch?" "You don't need to know," the Padre Guillaume Benet responded in a hushed tone. "Next, we can put aside dealing with Lumion, but we still have to maintain appearances. We can't let anyone suspect my desire for revenge. That will provide the connections the foreigners need and have a negative impact. What you need to do now is to remind each relevant person and scare those yokels who might notice. Don't let them spill the beans in front of those foreigners." "Guillaume, you mean that those foreigners are heir to investigate that matter?" Pons Benet appeared fearful and concerned. "Look at you. All brawn, no brains. You're nothing like your brother, a natural-born leader." Lumion mocked Pons Benet inwardly. Despite his disdain for the Padre, whom he saw as a crude and greedy stallion, rather than a man of the cloth, Lumion couldn't deny that he had a certain rugged charm. His direct, domineering style and clear mind won over the masses in the countryside, making it easy for them to idolize and rely on him. Guillaume Benet sneered. "No need to worry. So long as those foreigners don't find any real evidence, I'll still be the Padre of Cordoue. Pons, you need to understand that ruling through fear and intimidation won't lead to peace or prosperity. The Church doesn't want a ruined town that can't pay taxes. We need friends and followers to maintain control. By offering them protection, we can gain their support. The Church trusts us locals with our relatives, friends, and followers to handle matters here, and doesn't bring in outsiders who could make a mess. As long as there's no solid evidence, the higher-ups will continue to believe in me." "All right, I'm off to the cathedral." "That does sound logical and persuasive, but your wisdom and insight are limited to Dirige. Aurora told me that when the Church confronts villages that are overrun with evil gods, they obliterate them entirely and raze the land to the ground. They don't just slay the adults, but even the kids." Lumion found himself almost swayed by Guillaume Benet's words. Luckily, Aurora had warned him about the fearsome reputation of the Church of the Eternal Blazing Sun and the Church of the God of Steam and Machinery. After the Padre departed, Lumion took a different path and made it back home unscathed. Aurora, clad in a pristine apron, bustled about the oven. "What are you up to?" Lumion inquired with curiosity. It was still 2 hours to lunchtime. Aurora tucked a strand of her blonde locks behind her ear and beamed. "Trying out a new toast recipe. Rice bread. You don't have to go through all this trouble." Lumion was moved to his core. He believed Aurora was going out of her way to make something special just for him. Aurora giggled and retorted, "What are you thinking? Can you be any more self-absorbed? For me, baking is a form of amusement. It's a great way to pass the time. You get it? Then why don't you like going out? There's plenty of fun out there," Lumion probed. He always felt Aurora was a homebody, because she was too concerned about the risks her warlock status posed. Aurora swiveled her head and shot him a withering glare. "You mean drinking and gambling? Remember, I'm my own person, not relying on or attaching to others." Lumion grasped the first half of her statement, but was at a loss with the latter. "Ah, could you expound on that?" Aurora gave him a deadly glare. "Long story short, your sis is a major introvert most of the time." "What do you mean by most of the time?" Lumion queried, confused. "Humans are walking contradictions," Aurora mused, turning back to the oven. "Don't you recall? Sometimes I'm a chatterbox, eager to venture out and listen to the old ladies gossip. Other times, I'll play with the kids and regale them with tales. Every so often, I'll cut loose and ride Madame Puali's horse around the mountains, hollering at the top of my lungs. At the time, you shone like a dew-kissed rose, luring people in only to prick them." Lumion couldn't help but grumble to himself. Since Madame Puali's was mentioned, Lumion decided to change the subject. "Aurora, a grande sir. I heard a rumor about Madame Puali's. What is it?" Aurora did not hide her curiosity. "She's a warlock who can talk to the dead." Lumion related to his sister what Ava had divulged. He also brought up the anomaly he'd observed in Guillaume Binet's comments. Aurora halted her work and listened to her brother's account intently. Her mien grew noticeably graver. After Lumion had finished, Aurora offered him a smile and assuaged his fears. "Don't fret too much. Those 3 foreigners must be here for something that the Padre and his comrades did in secret. It might have to do with Madame Puali's. Don't mess with Madame Puali's for now. I'll keep an eye on them. Explore the village more, mingle with those foreigners, and try to suss out what's going on. Haha, compared to that, the lady who gave you the wand card is far more intriguing. If things do deteriorate, we must contemplate departing Cordu. We can start making arrangements now." "Okay." Lumion nodded in agreement. After a brief silence, he inquired curiously, "Aurora, if we must depart Cordu, where do you envision moving to?" "Trier," Aurora declared without hesitation. Trier was the capital of the Intis Republic, the apex of culture and art across the continent. "Why?" Despite considering Trier himself, Lumion posed the question casually. Every Intisian coveted a chance to visit Trier. In the eyes of Trierians, there were only 2 types of individuals in Intis: Trierians and outsiders. Aurora responded nonchalantly. "A prophet once said, as long as Trier endures, mirth and glee will never falter one." It was the dead of night, and all was quiet. Lumion stirred in his dream once more. The first thing he glimpsed was a faint gray mist. On impulse, he reached into his shirt pocket with his hand. The frigid sensation of cold, hard metal immediately registered in his mind. He retrieved the object he'd felt. A glint of gold illuminated his eyes. It was a gold coin. A Louis d'Or. "It's still here." Lumion sat up and peered down at himself. He still donned the cotton attire, pants, and leather jacket from his last expedition. The nearly 2-meter-long steel pitchfork and sharp, iron-black axe rested within arm's reach. This was precisely the same condition as when he'd exited the dream. In other words, this dream is persistent. It doesn't reset with each entry. Lumion fiddled with the Louis d'Or and slipped it into his cotton shirt's inner pocket. Though it couldn't be actualized, it was still a joy to have. Lumion rose from bed and gazed out the window for a spell, ensuring the red mountain peak in the ruins hadn't changed. He hoisted his axe and pitchfork, departed his chamber, and entered the dimly lit corridor. Aurora's bedroom and study doors remained ajar. Lumion studied them briefly, then suddenly conceived an idea. In the dream, My room is practically identical to reality. It contains all the expected elements. Aurora's room appears the same at first glance. However, can I locate her grimoires, mystical concoction formulas, or learn how to become a warlock in her quarters? This notion was akin to a devil's whisper, causing Lumien's heart to race. He was tempted to try. Compared to exploring the unknown, hazardous, enigmatic ruins, sifting through Aurora's room was the simpler, safer option. No. Lumien shook his head vigorously and cast the idea aside. He'd rather take his chances than violate Aurora's privacy. He wouldn't venture into her bedroom without her approval. This was due to his respect for Aurora. If it weren't for Aurora, he would have perished as a child on the streets 5 years ago. Lumien withdrew his pained gaze and made his way to the stairs. If the occupant of the room wasn't Aurora, he would have already delved into search for useful information. Once downstairs, Lumien didn't hasten his departure. Instead, he inspected the provisions in the kitchen. The olive oil, corn oil, and animal fat that Aurora had amassed were neatly arranged in buckets and cans, just like in reality. Almost instinctively, Lumien lifted the bucket of corn oil and positioned it near the stove. His sole reason for selecting it was that animal fat and olive oil were pricier. Then he adeptly kindled a blaze in the hearth with coal and wood, and fashioned a couple of torches to ignite. He was preparing to incinerate that monster. Naturally, it would be preferable if there were other options. That was a last resort. After completing these tasks, he retrieved his axe, opened the door, and departed. Lumien then observed something unusual. The faint gray mist that suffused the dream felt more humid than before. The ground beneath his feet was also slightly muddy. It rained. This place persists and develops naturally according to certain laws when I'm absent or dreaming. Lumien was somewhat taken aback, but he had an inkling that it was only fitting. Recalling Aurora's bizarre tales, he suddenly had a notion. This can't be the real world, can it? My dream is connected to the genuine world. That tarot card enables me to traverse the barrier between dream and the ruins while conscious? Lumien swiftly surveyed his surroundings and realized that an endless gray fog bordered both sides of the ruins. On the dream's periphery. I'll check later. I won't venture into the ruins. I'll stroll out of the gray fog and see if it's a surreal and irrational dream after passing through the gray fog, or if there's tangible land, sky, village, and town. If it were the former, it signified that this place was still a dream. If it wasn't, Lumien had to confirm which world this was. He surmised that based on the usage of the Louis d'Or, this place still appeared to be in the Intis Republic, but it might not be the present era. It could be a location that had vanished decades or centuries ago. However, Lumien sensed that there was a high likelihood that he wouldn't be able to exit the encompassing gray fog. He gathered his thoughts and proceeded toward the ruins. He didn't forget that the purpose of entering the dream was to attempt to contend with that monster. After traversing 100 to 200 meters in the muddy wilderness riddled with gravel and crevices, Lumien abruptly halted. He thought of a problem. He'd overlooked something in his preparations earlier. Previously, his two-story abode lacked any flames. It was quite secure in this world cloaked in gray fog. But now, it had a blazing furnace that emitted light. Would it draw in a swarm of monsters and render the safe zone unsafe? Lumien instinctively turned his head and peered in the direction he'd come from. He observed that a scarlet gleam had been etched on various glass windows at the base of the half-submerged two-story structure in the faint gray mist. It was akin to a beacon in the dark world. Considering that a considerable amount of time had elapsed, it was evidently too late to attempt to extinguish the fire. Lumien hastened his pace and entered the ruins, taking refuge in the building that had crumbled due to a conflagration. He clipped the axe to the back of his belt and agilely scaled a wall, concealing himself in a shadowy nook separated by bricks and timber. Lumien gazed at his home on the other side of the wilderness. As time ticked by, he didn't witness any monsters lured by the fire. Seems like the fire won't trigger any changes. At the very least, my house won't be besieged by monsters. Lumien breathed a sigh of relief. This meant that even if he encountered any peril, as long as he could flee home promptly and slumber as soon as possible, he could successfully elude it. He began to contemplate how to entice and eliminate the previous monster. From their brief skirmish, He'd deduced that its strength, speed, reaction time, and agility were similar to his, but he could sense that it fought on instinct. It lacked sufficient experience, expertise, or corresponding intelligence. That's why he'd been able to counter and slay it when it ambushed him. It'll also be bewildered and taken aback. It's not dissimilar to humans. Other than combat techniques, I have two other advantages over it. Firstly, I possess superior intelligence. Secondly, I know how to wield weapons and utilize tools. This is the greatest advantage humans possess over such monsters. As long as I'm cautious, defeating it again won't be arduous. The most crucial aspect is how to eradicate it completely. Just as Lumion was about to deliberately stir up some commotion to see if he could lure over some monster, he spied a figure stealthily approaching the utterly ruined house on the side. The figure was crimson and devoid of skin. Its muscles, blood vessels, and fascia were exposed. It was the monster from last time. Unlike before, this monster was wielding a manure fork. A manure fork. It knows how to wield weapons too. Lumion's countenance stiffened as his expression turned grim. Unwittingly, his confidence waned a bit. As the monster drew closer and turned, Lumion perceived exaggerated wounds on its back, neck, and the nape of its neck. However, the fissures were no longer oozing pus, and it appeared to have mostly mended. It's indeed the one I encountered previously. Its self-healing ability is many times superior to that of ordinary humans. Lumion gasped soundlessly. He compelled himself to compose and expeditiously assess the situation. In the twinkling of an eye, Lumion arrived at a determination. This was a prime opportunity, and he had to seize it when he encountered it. He couldn't let it slip by. He silently retrieved a stone brick beside him and awaited the monster's arrival at the desired location. In just a few strides, the monster entered Lumion's kill zone. Lumion abruptly hurled the stone brick at the ground behind the monster. Thud! The stone brick clattered, causing the monster to swivel around and scrutinize the assailant. Upon beholding this, Lumion seized the axe with both hands and pounced fiercely from the wall towards the monster. Bang! The axe descended heavily onto the monster's neck, cleaving it in two. With twin thuds, Lumion and the monster plummeted to the ground simultaneously. Lumion sprang up nimbly, seized his axe, and darted over, delivering weighty slashes to the monster's neck. Once, twice, thrice. The monster didn't even get a chance to resist before its head was lopped off. As the head rolled aside, the skinless body convulsed twice and ceased movement. Lumion didn't halt there. He took a diagonal step, rotated his axe, and pulverized the vicious head with its thick back, reducing it to fragments. Subsequently, he pivoted and hacked at the exposed muscles, blood vessels, and fascia, crushing the heart and other vital organs. After accomplishing all of this, Lumion took 2 paces backward and surveyed his handiwork. He panted and chuckled softly. "I thought you were truly invincible. Who'd have thought you possessed so little ability?" Amidst the subdued laughter, the decapitated cadaver abruptly jolted upward. Lumion's pupils contracted, and he instinctively wished to pivot and flee. He forcefully quelled this impulse and strode forward once more, brandishing his axe. After the corpse bounced twice, it reverted to immobility, as if it had writhed in vain. Lumion scrutinized it a while longer and ultimately verified that the monster was wholly deceased. How tenacious! Lumion sighed inwardly. Then he leaned over and crouched down. He employed his axe to pry open the muscles and fascias and scrutinized the corpse. The monster's bodily structure wasn't dissimilar to a human's, but its muscles were evidently more animated. Even though it was already dead, some of its incisions were still wriggling slightly. "There's no treasure, nor is there any supernatural power transferred into my body." Lumion assessed his present state and felt somewhat disenchanted. The adage that one grows stronger with each monster they slay indeed only existed in Aurora's tales. He then relocated the monster's corpse and head into the ruined building and entombed them with bricks and timber. Subsequently, he scoured the burnt-down house, hoping to discover something. After a bout of searching, Lumion stumbled upon a considerable number of gold coins, silver coins, and copper coins. In total, there were 197 vrol d'or and 25 kopit. Among them, Louis d'or alone constituted 5. As for the paper bills, he only discovered some suspected remnants. Aside from money, Lumion also discovered a small blue book. The book had a grayish-blue cover and measured approximately 21 by 28.5 centimeters, a typical size found in Intis villages and towns. It was an almanac mixed with the religious teachings of the two major churches. It had a rather positive effect on guiding farmers and herders to farm, produce, and graze to enrich their spiritual lives. Naturally, even though it had been nearly 2 centuries since Emperor Roselle advocated compulsory education, there were still a large number of farmers, herdsmen, and workers who knew no more than a handful of words and were illiterate. They could only rely on the explanations of certain people around them to obtain the instructions they needed from the Blue Book, literally known as Livre Bleu. Lumion flipped through a few pages nonchalantly and realized that the Livre Bleu was no different from his own. It was just that it appeared a little older overall. There's the Livre Bleu and so much Vril d'Or. This family is undoubtedly well-to-do in the countryside. There aren't more than 5 such families in Cordoue. Lumion discarded the Livre Bleu and placed the gold coins, silver coins, and copper coins into different pockets. Some were stashed deep in the cotton shirt's pocket, some were tucked into his pants pocket, and some were haphazardly stuffed into the pocket of his leather jacket. Even though Lumion knew that this wealth couldn't be brought to reality, he couldn't resist collecting it for safekeeping. These little trinkets of gold, silver, or copper were simply irresistible. During his days as a vagrant, he cherished every coin he came across, even if it was just a koppet or a lick. He often fought with others for them, and took risks to obtain them. After scouting the area, Lumion hoisted his axe and crept towards the collapsed building closer to the reddish-brown mountain peak. He proceeded deeper and deeper. Every time he traversed the empty space in the center of the ring, he was apprehensive that dozens of monsters would suddenly ambush him in an area without cover. In the faint gray fog, Lumion crouched down and sneaked behind a half-collapsed stone wall. He squatted there and utilized it to conceal his form. He cautiously poked his head out and surveyed the area ahead. It was a narrow strip between 2 rows of destroyed buildings. There were no trees, no weeds, just gravel, crevices, and dirt. Suddenly, a figure jumped into Lumion's line of sight. It stood in the opposing building, staring at something. This figure was garbed in a black robe with a hood. From the back, there was nothing peculiar. It appeared to be an ordinary human. Lumion's heart constricted as he became even more watchful. In such a dream ruin, the appearance of a regular person was far more terrifying than the appearance of a monster. As if sensing that someone was observing him, the figure swiveled around slowly. Lumion snuck a quick glance before retracting his head hastily. He leaned against the wall and didn't dare to budge. With just one look, he had the impression that he had descended into hell or an abyss. The figure was indeed a human, but he had 3 faces and 6 eyes. The face in front had cloudy eyes, sparse eyebrows, and numerous wrinkles. He was evidently an old man. The left side was a chiseled face with sharp-looking blue eyes and a thick black beard, making him appear like a burly man. The skin on the right side was smooth and delicate, like a peeled egg. The blue eyes exuded obvious innocence and ignorance. It didn't seem a day over 5 years of age. What kind of monster is this? Lumion attempted to regulate his breathing to prevent his heart from racing. Such a monster had never surfaced, even in Aurora's horror tales. Only in the deepest and most absurd nightmares could it be encountered. Although it was not good to judge a person by their appearance, Lumion instinctively sensed that the 3-faced monster was far more powerful than the skinless monster from earlier. Furthermore, there was a high probability that it had exceptional abilities. Eternal Blazing Sunday, Great Father, please protect me from being discovered by it. Upon witnessing this scene, Lumion couldn't help but pray to the eternal blazing sun. If he weren't still clutching an axe in one hand and was in a perilous environment, he would have extended his arms, a gesture symbolizing the adoration of the sun. At that moment, time appeared to stand still. Lumion believed he might be hallucinating. It was as if someone's stare pierced through the wall and landed on his back. His back stiffened instantly and felt somewhat warm. In just a second or two, the illusion vanished, and heavy footsteps receded into the distance. Lumion waited a while until the footsteps dissipated completely. Then, he gradually straightened his knees, turned around, and poked his head out to survey the area ahead. The monster was farther away, having arrived behind the collapsed building whose two sides still stood. Half of its body was visible in the faint gray mist. It still had his back to Lumion, as though it had transformed into a statue. Lumion breathed a sigh of relief. He didn't have the confidence to confront such a monster. It's definitely impossible to venture deeper into the ruins from here. Should I circumvent it? Won't there be comparable monsters elsewhere? The closer I approach that mountain peak, the more potent the monsters that emerge. Lumion retracted his body and deliberated for a while before deciding to conclude the night. He intended to inquire with the woman, who gave him the tarot card after daybreak, to see if there was a means of dealing with the three-faced monster. If there was no alternative, he would consider taking a detour. He arched his back, detached from the wall, and headed in the direction he came from. At that moment he had a notion. If I slumber in these ruins, will I be able to escape the dream? Considering the possibility of numerous monsters in the vicinity, he suppressed the urge to experiment for now. On the way back, he hastily searched every destroyed building he passed, but he couldn't unearth any useful written information. There were only a few coins. After retreating for a while, Lumion conceived a notion and decided to take a detour. He approached the burnt-out house that he encountered first from the side, where he had buried the skinless monster. He wanted to see if the monster's demise would be detected by its kin, and if it would result in any changes. After locating the spot and concealing himself, Lumion poked his head out from the side and scrutinized the target area. In the following moment, he caught sight of another figure. The figure was half human and half beast. Its legs were bent forward as it squatted there and inspected the skinless monster's cadaver. It had already removed the stone bricks and wooden blocks that Lumion had stacked. It wore a dark jacket and relatively snug muddy pants. Its black hair that hung to its neck was unkempt and greasy, and it carried a shotgun on its back. A shotgun? Lumion averted his gaze hastily and withdrew his head. These monsters are truly absurd. They actually know how to wield a shotgun. At that moment, Lumion felt like he was a hunter, hunting in the mountains with his weapon and comrades, only to discover that the rabbit opposite him was clutching a water-cooled machine gun and targeting them. He considered it ridiculous and immersion-breaking, as well as disappointing. As time elapsed, he waited patiently for the monster with the shotgun to depart. Finally, he discerned a faint sound of movement, gradually receding. Lumion stuck his head out cautiously once again and examined the monster that was half human and half beast. It moved like a cat towards the back of the building. Initially, Lumion's heart eased, but then his eyes widened. He realized that the path the monster took was precisely the same as the route he took when he ventured deep into the ruins. It's tracking me. It has an extraordinary tracking ability. Lumion made a subconscious evaluation. He was exceedingly grateful that he had opted for a detour when he returned. Otherwise, he would have certainly collided with it, and might have even been ambushed. As soon as the monster vanished, Lumion sprang up and dashed towards his house. The crimson fire that reflected in the glass window on the ground floor of the house was akin to sunlight that could dispel darkness. Lumion sprinted all the way to his two-story building, yanked open the unlatched door, and rushed inside. After locking the door, he gazed at the ruins through the window. Far from the gray mist, at the edge of the ruins, there stood a faint figure, but it didn't approach. Phew! Lumion exhaled and planned to extinguish the fire, ascend upstairs to slumber, and exit the dream. He glanced at the still-burning fire and murmured to himself, "It can still burn for a while. I can experiment and see if it continues to burn until it extinguishes after I depart the dream, or if it is frozen in time the moment I leave." Lumion had previously verified through the rain that the wilderness where the ruins were located was undergoing natural development. It had nothing to do with whether he was dreaming or not, but whether the same situation was transpiring in his house, or the so-called safe zone remained to be verified. He acted on his notion. He added a few more coals to the fire and fiddled with them. Then, he carried the axe and steel fork to the second floor and entered the bedroom. When Lumion arose, it was just after daybreak. He inspected his shirt-like pajamas. As anticipated, he was disheartened to discover that the gold coins, silver coins, and copper coins did not accompany him into reality. Lumion exited the bed and stretched his body. He sauntered to the desk and extended his hand to draw the curtains. Amidst the sound, a mild and refreshing radiance trickled in. As the window opened, fresh and organic air invaded Lumion's nostrils. He couldn't help but extend himself, feeling that waking up early was quite pleasant at times. Of course, this was also owing to the patriotic public health campaign that Emperor Roselle had launched. Even though it had little effect on the villages, it brought about beneficial changes. Feces became something valuable that wasn't strewn around everywhere. It was also thanks to the subsequent rulers who had preserved it and only altered its name. He surveyed his surroundings, sometimes gazing at the far-off forest, sometimes scrutinizing the orange-red clouds in the sky, and sometimes observing the weeds outside the house. Suddenly Lumion's stare froze. He spied a larger bird perched on an elm tree not far away. It had a pointed beak, a feline face, brown feathers with scattered spots, brownish-yellow eyes combined with black pupils, giving it a sharp appearance. It was an owl. It appeared to be observing Lumion. That owl? That owl from the warlock legend? His mind raced with possibilities, trying to comprehend the gravity of the situation. His blood seemed to freeze. It was worse than facing the three-faced monster. After all, this was no longer a dream. This was reality. Even if his demise in a dream led to the same in reality, it was different psychologically. What should I do? Will Aurora be implicated? As Lumion racked his brain for a countermeasure, the owl remained still, observing him with a piercing gaze. After a few seconds, the owl spread its wings and flew towards the distant forest. Its graceful glide carried it down, until it vanished into Cordu. Only when the owl had completely vanished did Lumion's mind snap back to the present. He slumped into a chair and lifted a hand to his forehead. He was drenched in sweat. Is it truly the owl of the warlock legend? Has it truly lived for so many years? In any case, it was unlike any other owl with dull eyes. It almost looked human. If it's really that owl, why did it choose to fly just outside my window? Is it because I want to uncover the truth about the warlock legend? But we've already given up. It left after a few moments of observation. I wonder if it will return and cause trouble for Aurora. Despite wanting to observe the situation further since nothing had happened yet, Lumion knew he couldn't keep it from his sister any longer. After leaving the room, he saw that Aurora was still asleep. He went downstairs to prepare breakfast, all of which were his sister's favorite dishes. Sunny side up, meringue cookies, ordinary toast with jam. I have to make noodles later. This time, I'll add meat sauce. Lumion mentally noted that the noodle compartment was empty and decided to refill it sometime in the next 2 days. It was Aurora's favorite dish. Aurora descended the staircase in a flowing nightgown, her golden locks tousled. The breakfast spread was readied. Morning, she mumbled, stifling a yawn. Lumion grinned at her. It's not getting early. Don't you always say a day's planning starts early in the morning? That's right. My plan is to sleep. Aurora settled into her seat and tucked into her breakfast with a glass of milk. Lumion sat across from Aurora, at the table that could fit 6. As he nibbled on a pancake, he casually said, I've been in the village for the past few days, trying to find out the truth about those legends. Why? Aurora asked. Lumion was very frank. You didn't want to help me get superpowers, so I decided to find my own way. Those legends might contain clues. It's almost impossible, Aurora commented, her tone casual. The legends have been twisted beyond recognition over the years. Or hallucinated by some loony. It's meaningless. Yes. It's also possible that someone specially made up a story as an excuse. Haha. And the contributions of rubberneckers like you. What? Lumion didn't understand what Aurora meant by rubbernecker. It wasn't even Antisian. It means people who can't help but get involved in drama they have no business in, Aurora explained simply. And judging by how you are suddenly raising this matter, I'm guessing you've caused some trouble, and now have no choice but to come home to ask your sister for help. It can be considered an accident, but it's not to the extent of causing trouble, Lumion said, undaunted. Lumian organized his thoughts carefully. My first target was the warlock legend. What warlock legend? Aurora's confusion was palpable. Lumian couldn't believe it. You've never heard of it? A long time ago, a person in the village suddenly died. When he was buried, an owl flew over and stopped by his bed. It only flew away when the corpse was lifted. After that, the corpse became very heavy. It took 9 bulls to pull the coffin. Only then did the villagers know that the person was a warlock when he was alive. Aurora was listening intently. I really wasn't aware of such a legend before. It doesn't make sense. Lumian was incredulous. Aurora may have been a homebody, but she still made time to socialize with the other old ladies in town. She loved telling stories to the children, and was always up to date on the latest court gossip. It was hard to believe she hadn't heard about the warlock legend that had been circulating for years. But what was even more intriguing was the fact that her house was built on the very spot where the warlock's home once stood. Lumian had a hunch from the start that Aurora's decision to settle in Cordu was driven by the allure of the warlock's treasure, the key to unlocking extraordinary power. And then, Aurora asked calmly. Lumian answered truthfully, we did some digging around, and we got confirmation from the village elders. This wasn't some tall tale. The warlock really did exist, but that was decades ago. The church burned the house down, and now the land belongs to you. Is that so? Aurora was obviously a little surprised. I knew it. There's always a catch. Why else would they sell me this land at a price lower than the norm? I thought it was because of my gift of gab. When it came to old ladies. She thought for a moment and asked, so, the church burned the warlock's body? Lumian nodded. Yes. His ashes are buried in the cemetery beside the cathedral. He continued, we've given up on this matter because all the clues led to a dead end. But this morning, I saw an owl outside my window. It looked just like the one in the legend. Aurora's expression became serious. Are you certain? I can't say for sure, but it didn't look like any ordinary owl. Lumian responded objectively. Aurora pondered for a moment before saying slowly, don't leave the village for now. And after dark, don't step outside until I've finished investigating the situation. She gave a sour smile. I've warned you before about the dangers of seeking supernatural power. But look, trouble has already found you. Fortunately, it seems that the other party doesn't have any malicious intentions. The problem should be resolved relatively easily. I'm glad you're on guard. Lumian lowered his head and said straightforwardly, Grande sir, I was wrong. He changed the subject. Did your pen pals write back? How can it be that fast? It's not like we're sending a post. Aurora scoffed. Lumian was puzzled. Isn't post already referring to letters and packages sent through the post office? He was not too concerned. After all, Aurora often used strange words. At the entrance of Old Tavern, Lumian stood there and surveyed the area. He knew that the woman who had given him the tarot card wouldn't be awake yet, so he was looking for the 3 foreigners, Ryan, Leah, and Valentine. As expected, the trio was enjoying a lavish breakfast at a table inside the tavern. Lumian observed them for a few seconds, taking in the spread of trout rolls, wine, and mayonnaise bread, before leaving without disturbing them. Some time later, as Ryan and the others prepared to continue strolling around Cordu and chatting with the locals, Lumian approached them with open arms and a bright smile. Good morning, my cabbages. Valentine's face twitched, and between Ryan and Leah, one looked slightly embarrassed while the other looked amused. They're dressed exactly the same. Did they not bring many changes of clothes despite being out? Lumian noticed that Leah was still clad in a snug pleated cashmere dress, a small white coat, and a pair of Marseillan boots, each adorned with a small silver bell. Her veil, which doubled as a hat, also had bells attached to it. Ryan was still sporting a drab duffel coat and pale yellow strides, topped with a rough dark bowler hat. And Valentine still had powdered hair and makeup on his face. Good morning, Lumian. What brings you here? Ryan asked calmly. Lumian looked aggrieved as he responded, well, you guys are my friends, and I have nothing to do. I thought I'd come visit. He then questioned them. I noticed that you've been chatting with people in the village for the past few days. Is there anything you want to ask? You can come to me if you have any questions, my cabbages. I'm your friend. We can't trust your answer, Valentine interjected. Ryan shot him a look, signaling him to calm down. Lumion smiled. So you can completely trust the others? Leah was at a loss for words, while Ryan thought for a moment before responding. Actually, we can't completely trust anyone. We have to make a comprehensive judgment, based on the answers we get from different people, and the situation we observe. That's more like it. Lumion spread his hands. Well, then it wouldn't hurt to hear my answer. At least it's a reference. Ryan was silent for a moment before glancing around. The early morning in Cordu was bustling with people heading to the farmlands, but there was hardly anyone near Old Tavern. Here's the deal, he said finally. We're here to find someone. The Padre? Lumion asked with a smile. Ryan shook his head. No. We visited the Padre to find this person. Who is it? Lumion asked with interest. I know everyone in the village. I should be able to help. Ryan did not show any joy. Actually, we don't know who this person is, how old they are, or what they look like. We received an unsigned letter some time ago, and we're trying to find the person who wrote it. Lumion couldn't help but wonder if the letter was from an informer. He feigned puzzlement. Did the person who wrote the letter not reach out to you after you arrived in the village? No, Leah replied for Ryan. Perhaps they don't feel safe and don't trust you? Lumion suggested eagerly. Can't you glean any clues from the contents of the letter? Lumion was curious about the letter's contents. If it was targeting the Padre's crew, he'd be happy to help them. But if it involved Aurora, he'd urge his sister to move. After all, Aurora communicated with her pen pals frequently, and if any of them were caught, she could be implicated. The letter could be a crucial clue. Ryan shook his head. The letter was just 2 simple sentences. It seemed like a man in deep trouble was seeking our help. Did he not mention what kind of trouble he was in? Lumion breathed a sigh of relief. There was no way a letter from Aurora, or her pen pals, could be that short. Nothing, Ryan replied with a soft sigh. Lumion couldn't help but mock them in his heart. It's just a letter asking for help, and you're here? Aren't you afraid this is just a prank? Even the people from the Inquisition aren't as enthusiastic as you. Isn't this too nice, too kind, and too missionful? Normally, he would have voiced these thoughts aloud, but he needed to get information from them. So he held his tongue and forced himself to be patient. Despite his reservations, Lumion knew that Ryan wouldn't reveal the entire situation to him. They must have other considerations or reasons for coming to Cordu and searching for the person who wrote the vague letter. Lumion stroked his chin and suggested tentatively, why don't you show me the letter? Perhaps I can identify the writer from their handwriting. Valentine, with his powdered hair, gave Lumion a look that said, Do you think we're fools? Leah chuckled. Do you know how to appraise handwriting? Barely, Lumion admitted sincerely. He then added inwardly, being able to appraise Aurora's and my own handwriting is also considered a form of appraisal. It's useless, Ryan interjected, shaking his head. Every word in the letter came from a lever blue, and the entire sentence was comprised of cut slips. Lumion couldn't help but wonder why the writer was being so cautious. Why hide their identity in such a way when they were asking for help? Were they afraid of interception and retaliation? Or was there something wrong with them that they didn't want to be exposed? Lumion tried to analyze the writer's mentality. Lumion put on a look of realization and said, So you've been chatting with people in the village to see if anyone else has experienced similar damage to their lever blue? But the person who wrote the letter could have purchased a new lever blue without anyone knowing, or even thrown it away after using it. That's just one of the leads we're following, Ryan explained calmly. Lumion didn't treat himself as an outsider at all and asked, Are there any other leads? Well, if someone is asking for help, then something must be happening, and there will always be some traces left behind, Ryan responded after some thought. That makes sense, Lumion said, looking troubled for Ryan and the others, as if he could empathize with their situation. He promised solemnly, My cabbages, I'll keep an eye out for you. Hopefully we'll find some clues. Thank you, Ryan replied politely. Leah had regained her composure and asked Lumion, Since we're friends, I have a question for you. Go ahead. Lumion smiled. Why did the villagers in the tavern laugh when you called us cabbage? Leah was rather intrigued. Although it was embarrassing, cabbage was a common local slang term, and it shouldn't have been a cause for laughter. Lumian explained sincerely, in slang, cabbage means darling or beloved. It's mainly used between intimate friends, or between an elder and a junior. My bunny and my chicks are similar. He emphasized the word intimate as he spoke. Then, with an innocent expression, he added, I just wanted us to be intimate friends. Lumian's innocent expression suggested that he had no idea what intimate meant. More like you want to be our senior. Leah finally understood why the villagers were laughing. While Lumian's explanation may not have been entirely truthful, it was logically convincing. Ryan nodded in agreement. Is there anything else? Nope, Lumian replied, not wanting to appear too eager and arouse suspicion about him and Aurora. His sister couldn't undergo an investigation. After watching Leah and the others leave with the sound of the tinkling bells, Lumian sat at the entrance of Old Tavern and waited for the lady with the mysterious background to wake up. After a while, Lumian's friend, Raymond Gregg, approached him. Lumian, have you decided which legend to investigate next? Raymond asked. In the past 2 days, Raymond had been even more proactive than Lumian in this matter. After all, he didn't have any strange dreams or other ways of obtaining treasure. Not yet. The owl had already come knocking on his door. He couldn't risk investigating the legend without confirming the situation first. I'll think about it after the Lent festival, Lumian explained, trying to sound casual. Okay, that makes sense, Raymond agreed. I don't have to be a green watcher for the time being then. I'll head out after Lent. Even if there are grazers in the meantime, it won't cause much damage. Do you mean you don't have to leave the village for the next few days? Lumian asked Raymond. Raymond nodded in confirmation, and Lumian smiled. What a coincidence. I can't leave the village for the next few days either. Raymond was confused. Why not? He asked. Lumian lowered his voice and spoke with a serious expression. This morning, I met the owl from the Warlock legend. It said that if it weren't for the cathedral and the gaze of God in the village, it would have taken my soul and thrown it into the abyss. Raymond was shocked and frightened, and his entire body trembled. Is that for real? I told you not to provoke such an evil creature. Raymond suddenly saw a smile appear on Lumian's face. Only then did Raymond remember his good friend's nature. You're pulling a prank on me, it's a lie, isn't it? He asked, feeling both angry and anxious. He was angry at himself for falling for Lumian's deception yet again. He knew what kind of person Lumian was, and had been fooled by him many times before. You believe such a ridiculous thing? Lumian chuckled. Quietly, Lumian added to himself that he had made up the story to prevent Raymond from going straight to the cathedral to repent when he couldn't withstand the pressure. Raymond relaxed and breathed a sigh of relief. Phew. Lumian offered some advice to Raymond. Although I made up that story just now, it's true that pursuing the truth of a legend can be dangerous. Try not to leave the village, or the cathedral's protection if you can. Silently, Lumian added to himself, and that's the truth. Although most of the story was fabricated, half of it was true. I wouldn't have reminded you and shared Aurora's advice in a different way if I didn't need your help with many things in the future. Whether someone lives or dies has nothing to do with me. Raymond recalled the feeling of fear and nodded in understanding. All right. He changed the subject and asked, who are you going to vote for to be the spring elf? The spring elf was the symbol of spring and the start of many celebrations during Lent. In the Deriz area, the whole village usually voted for an unwed beautiful girl to play the role. Ava, Lumian replied nonchalantly. Hasn't she always wanted to be the spring elf? I'll choose her too, Raymond said, secretly relieved. Yesterday, Ava had hinted to him that she wanted him to vote for her, so he felt the need to help her canvass for votes. Outside a house not far from Old Tavern, Ryan, Leah, and Valentine weren't in a hurry to find someone to chat. Valentine raised his hand to cover his mouth and nose. Is it really okay to say so much to that guy just now? He asked. The air around them was filled with the faint smell of poultry feces. Leah fiddled with a silver bell above her head. I don't know if there's a problem. All I can confirm is that my divination results tell me he's of help. Ryan explained his intention. If we can't turn the situation around, leaking some information and instilling fear in the relevant people could be effective. Next, we'll observe him more closely and see what he'll do or who he'll find. After Raimund left, Lumion entered Old Tavern and saw the lady who had given him the tarot card in her usual spot. She was wearing a white blouse and a pair of baggy light-colored pants, and beside her hand was a round straw hat adorned with a few yellow flowers. She really has a lot of clothes in her suitcase. She changes them every day, unlike Leah and the others who look so shabby. Lumion thought to himself as he moved closer and sat opposite her. During this process, he casually glanced at her breakfast, which consisted of a plump mince pie with a thin sauce, a few Darioles, cubed seasonal fruit, and a light-colored transparent drink with some impurities. This isn't something Old Tavern can provide. Lumion pointed at the drink on the table and asked the lady, as though they were close friends, "What is this?" "It doesn't look like wine. It's called Venus Sacred Oil," the lady replied casually. "It's made from sugar and cinnamon water soaked in vanilla and mixed with poppies. It was invented by a Baron Trier." The word Venus came from Emperor Roselle. He mentioned in a story that she was a woman comparable to a goddess of beauty. Lumion was intrigued. "Where did you get it? Did you concoct it yourself?" he asked, suspecting that the nearest city, Darige, couldn't provide something similar. The lady smiled. "As a traveler, it's my professional instinct to obtain suitable things at the right time." Lumion was honest. "I don't understand." He then said, "I've finished the previous monster. This time, I've encountered 2 even more dangerous ones." He went on to describe the monster with 3 faces, and the one with a shotgun on its back. "I feel that they all have powers that surpass ordinary humans. They're not something I can deal with. Is there any way to deal with them?" The lady took a bite of the dariole and rolled her eyes. She smiled and said, "I'm not sure about the 3-faced monster, but you are more than capable of dealing with the one with the shotgun, as long as you use what's special about yourself." Lumion was both surprised and confused. "A special trait? What's so special about me? I don't even know myself." The lady smiled at him and said, "That's your dream. As the owner of the dream, you naturally enjoy special treatment. It's just that you haven't realized it yet." Lumion was on edge, his mind racing with excitement and fear. "What is it exactly?" The woman took a leisurely sip of Venus Sacred Oil before replying in a calm, unhurried tone. "You have to ask yourself that." Having said that, she lowered her head slightly and focused on enjoying her breakfast, giving the impression that she had no intention of continuing the conversation. "Why do you keep parts of the matter untold and only answer at the next opportunity? Isn't this a waste of everyone's time?" He couldn't help but feel inferior to her ability to infuriate others. Taking a deep breath, he forced a smile and bade farewell. Lumion obediently spent the rest of the day at home. This wasn't out of fear of the owl to the point of not daring to step out during the day, nor was it because he had nothing to do, but to avoid arousing suspicion. Lumion was determined to get to the bottom of the help-seeking letter that Leah and her companions had in their possession. He needed to find out what was written and who wrote it. The key to his investigation was to flip through every lever blue in the village and find the one with words cut out. As a villager, Lumion was best suited for this task, but he was hesitant to proceed after talking to the 3 foreigners. It could attract someone's attention and cause unnecessary trouble. This was a matter of life and death, survival or doom, and Lumion knew that even with Aurora's protection, he couldn't guarantee that the other party wouldn't take any risky actions against him. In the past 2 years, he had become better at figuring out the threshold required for pranks. This was due to his rich experience. He planned on visiting every family in a few days, using the excuse of pursuing the legends related to Lent. After dinner, when it was dark, Aurora returned to her bedroom to finally write a manuscript that was long overdue. Lumion entered the study planning to find some books related to dreams to read, hoping to gain some special inspiration for his dream. As they only had one battery-powered table lamp at home, which was being used by Aurora, he had to light up the kerosene lamp that had a pungent smell and was not great for illumination purposes. Carrying the kerosene lamp that emitted a dim yellow glow, Lumion quickly swiped his other hand across the backs of the books. Occasionally, he would choose a book and clamp it under his armpit. After a while, He returned to the table with 3 selected books. Just as he placed the books in his hand, Lumion saw the Livre Bleu at home. It was quietly placed in a corner of the desk as usual, and the gray-blue cover seemed a little dusty. Upon seeing this Livre Bleu, Lumion instantly thought of the book he had obtained in the Dream Ruins, and the book that had been cut and meshed into a plea for help. He reached out and picked up the Livre Bleu in front of him, planning to flip through the content to see which words were suitable for cutting and piecing into useful sentences. After flipping through a few pages, Lumion's gaze froze. There was an obvious hole in the notes attached to the current calendar page. A word had been cut out. No way, Lumion whispered, extremely shocked. He quickly flipped through the Livre Bleu in his hand and found more than 10 words cut out. No way, Lumion whispered again, his reaction almost the same as before. The Livre Bleu that Ryan, Leah, Valentine, and the others were searching for turned out to be the one at home. Not only had they not expected it, but Lumion had never even fathomed this possibility. It didn't even cross his mind. Amidst the indescribably complicated emotions, Lumion frowned. Could it be Aurora who requested help? Why did she seek help from the officials? Why didn't she tell me? Based on Leah and the others' behavior, their habitual choice to discuss matters with the Padre as soon as they arrived, and other details, Lumion made a preliminary judgment that they were officials. They could be from the government, Deri's Eternal Blazing Sun Church, or the God of Steam and Machinery Church. Lumion hesitated, his expression constantly changing. Finally, he made up his mind. He took the Livre Bleu and walked out of the study to Aurora's bedroom. He planned on asking her directly, and chose to believe in Aurora. Knock. 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 Lumion bent his finger and knocked on the door. Come on in. Aurora's voice sounded. Lumion turned the handle and pushed open the door to enter. Under the bright light of the table lamp, Aurora, who was wearing a 2-piece cotton pajama set, had bound her golden hair with a headband and was engrossed in writing a story. Did you cut this? Lumion asked, interrupting his sister before she could speak. Ah. Aurora turned around in confusion, her eyes blank and distant, as if she was still deep in thought. Lumion handed over the Livre Bleu, which had been flipped to the corresponding page, and stared into Aurora's eyes. You didn't cut this. Aurora gazed at it carefully for a few seconds before looking up in amusement. Would I be so bored and childish? I'm steady, mature, and broad-minded, unlike you. Aurora's reaction was natural, and she didn't seem surprised or flustered that her secret had been exposed. Lumion didn't hide his confusion and asked, but who would have cut out words from the Livre Bleu? Wasn't it you? Aurora sized up her brother. After reading my novel, you planned on mimicking what you read and cut out words from books and newspapers to create a random letter to play a huge prank on the village. But before that, you wanted to see if you could fool me? Are you testing my deductive abilities? This really doesn't seem like Aurora's doing. Lumion's gaze was fixed on Aurora's face, not letting go of even the slightest change in her expression. But his sister's performance was flawless. It wasn't me. Lumion frowned. Who could have done it? Aurora smiled. Go on and play your little game of deduction. I have a manuscript to finish. If I have time tomorrow, I'll help you figure out the truth. Using extraordinary means, Lumion tersely acknowledged her words and stopped disturbing his sister's creation. He took the Livre Bleu and returned to his unlit room, sitting on the chair behind the desk. Who could it be? Under the illumination of the crimson moon, Lumion muttered, trying to make deductions. We are a family of 2. Aurora is a warlock with extraordinary abilities. She won't let others ransack our home. If it's really not her, and in her words, when you have eliminated the impossible, whatever remains, however improbable, must be the truth. So in the case of having only 2 choices, I'm actually the one who did this? For a moment Lumion found it absurd and funny. So I'm the criminal? Why don't I know that? Lumion couldn't help but turn his body and look at the full-body mirror attached to the wardrobe. Under the crimson moonlight, his mirror reflection was wearing a linen shirt and brown pants. His handsome features didn't have a smile on them, and his expression was abnormally heavy. He was very sure that he had never cut out the content from the Livre Bleu. To eliminate the possibility, he recalled his experiences in the past month. Although many details were already a blur, he was still very certain about what he had done. Bathing in the crimson moon's light that seeped in through the windows, Lumion muttered to himself, "Could it be that I did it when I was unconscious? While having that dream, I can sleepwalk in reality. No, that's impossible. Aurora said that she would watch me. If I really sleepwalked and cut the lever blue, she would have pointed it out just now. Moreover, the letter must have been sent during the day. I'm very awake during those times." Lumion eliminated himself and thought of other possibilities. Someone else who came here, perhaps? Although their family had few guests usually, it did not mean that they did not have any. Firstly, poorer neighbors would come to borrow the stove or oven to smoke meat or make bread. Secondly, Lumion's friends would come to his house from time to find some simple novels to read or listen to his stories. Lastly, Nasli, Madame Pualis, and a few other ladies visited Aurora from time to have a chat with her. Among them, Madame Pualis came the most. She even lent Aurora a pony, so that Aurora could ride freely in the mountains. They were quite close. After all, in a village like Cordu, only an author like Aurora was worthy of Madame Pualis' friendship. Madame Pualis appeared very amiable on the surface, often basking in the sun with the other women and chatting with them, and even catching lice with them. She had a good reputation in the village. Although Madame Pualis and Aurora could be considered friends, Lumion did not like her at all. Madame Pualis would often introduce one of her relatives to Aurora and persuade her to get married and have children as soon as possible. It would be fine if Madame Pualis' relatives were nice, but every time Lumion asked around in Darige, he found that the other party either had bad character or was not very capable. They were about to fall into poverty, and none of them made the cut. The first time might have been a coincidence, but with it happening every time, Lumion bore a hatred for Madame Pualis. It's definitely impossible for those who come here to smoke meat or bake bread. There's always someone watching them. They won't be allowed to go up to the second floor. Raimund, Ava, and the others are also unlikely suspects. I'll accompany them the entire time. Madame Pualis, Nasli, and the other ladies have a certain chance. Every time they come, Aurora will keep them in the study to read while she prepares some snacks. If Madame Pualis is really a witch, then it's understandable that she needs to hide her identity from the authorities. Also, she is very careful to use other people's lever blue to avoid being traced back to her. Did she discover something when she was having an affair with the padre? Did she have to protect herself in this way? The more he thought about it, the more excited he became. He felt like he was about to lock onto a suspect. He stood up, paced a few steps and suddenly walked downstairs. He didn't want to question Madame Pualis, nor did he plan to pry into her actions now. Instead, he planned to find Raimund or Guillaume Jr. and use their lever blue as a comparison to determine which words had been cut out and what sentence could be formed. This way, Lumion could recreate the exact content of the request for help. He rushed down the stairs, through the kitchen, and opened the front door. The crimson darkness outside rushed in, instantly calming him down. Grande Sir said that before we figure out the owl's situation, I shouldn't go out after dark. Lumion muttered. He took 2 steps back and closed the door. Anyway, there was no hurry to borrow the lever blue. It would be more natural to do it tomorrow. After doing a stretch, Lumion walked towards the staircase. Ding 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 ding. The doorbell rang, the sound echoing through the house. Who is it? Lumion turned around in confusion, calling out as he walked towards the door. A slightly magnetic and gentle female voice sounded from outside. It's me, Pualis de Roquefort. Madame Pualis. Lumion was shocked to see Madame Pualis standing outside his door. He had the illusion that someone had come to his place to silence him, but knowing that his sister was upstairs and had superpowers, he calmed down significantly. Exhaling slowly, Lumion walked over and opened the door. There were 2 women standing outside the door. The one in front was wearing a pure black and exquisite corset dress. She had a shawl of the same color on her shoulders, fishnet gloves on her hands, and a lady's round hat that was slightly slanted. She was dressed in black, with only a diamond necklace inlaid with gold hanging on her chest. Her eyebrows were slightly thin, framing her bright, smiling brown eyes. Her long brown hair was tied into a high bun, and her facial features were not outstanding, but when combined, they had a clean and charming beauty. Coupled with her elegant temperament and graceful posture, it made the night at Lumien's door that was dyed a little red seem much fresher because of her. There was also a faint fragrance coming from her. Madame Pualis, the wife of the Cordoba village administrator, and the territory's judge Beast. Lumien knew he had to add words like, the mistress of the padre, suspected witch, help-seeking suspect, and the fair naked body in the cathedral in his heart. However, these were not suitable to be said out loud. Otherwise, Madame Pualis would definitely change her expression on the spot. If he succeeded in angering her, disaster might follow. Madame Pualis, what's the matter? Lumien deliberately looked out at the sky, hinting that it was not appropriate for Madame Pualis to visit at this time. Madame Pualis's red lips were a little moist as she spoke softly. I'm here to discuss something with your sister Aurora. From her appearance alone, she did not look like a woman in her 30s with 2 children. She was at most in her late 20s. Lumien deliberated for a moment and made way. Aurora is upstairs, writing for her newspaper column, he informed the entering Madame Pualis. Pualis nodded and said to the lady's maid beside her, Kathy, wait for me downstairs. Yes, madam. Dressed in a black and white lady's maid outfit, Kathy took a few steps towards the warm stove. Lumien led Madame Pualis through the kitchen and towards the stairs. Madame Pualis stopped at the corner. What's wrong? Lumien turned around and pretended to be confused. Madame Pualis asked with a smile, Did you deliberately bring the 3 foreigners to the cathedral? She's finally here to question me. Lumien didn't panic, but instead calmed down. Lumien's previous experience of pranking and infuriating people had taught him that at such times, he could not directly answer the other party's question, nor could he defend himself. The best choice was to blame the other party for making a certain error. Of course, this still depended on the situation. Turning around and running was an alternative. Lumien revealed a furious look as he gazed at Madame Pualis and said, You guys were actually having an affair in God's cathedral. He then spread open his arms and seemingly gestured as though he was embracing the sun. My God, my father, forgive the sacrilege of this guilty man and woman. Madame Pualis watched him quietly, the ends of her lips curling beautifully. I think God will forgive us. I read a book once that said, A lady who shares a bed with her true love is cleansed of all sins. For love legitimizes pleasure, as though from the purest of hearts. I'm very happy with Guillaume Benet. Therefore, the eternal blazing sun wouldn't be angry about this. It's not a sin. What kind of books are you reading, madam? Lumien couldn't help but inwardly criticize. But, Madame Pualis continued, this is indeed disrespectful to Saint Sith. Every region of Intis had 1 or 2 guardian angels or saints, recognized by the Church of the Eternal Blazing Sun, or the Church of the God of Steam and Machinery's canon, or they had made special contributions in Intis's history. They were well known and respected by the 2 churches. In the Dirige region, the saint in charge of the Eternal Blazing Sun Church was Saint Sith. Every Eternal Blazing Sun cathedral here could actually be called Saint Sith Cathedral. However, to differentiate them, only the largest and core cathedral was called that. Others had other names in place. Therefore, Madame Pualis and the Padre having an affair in the cathedral was equivalent to Saint Sith's butler secretly bringing someone home and doing the deed in his master's bedroom. It was a great disrespect to the patron saint. That's right, Lumien nodded solemnly. Isn't the Padre ashamed? Madame Pualis burst into laughter. After laughing, she said to Lumien, Back then, I also persuaded him. I said, Oh la la, how can we do such a thing in the Cathedral of Saint Sith? Guess what the Padre said? He said, Oh, then Saint Sith might have to put up with it a little. Lumien, who was inexperienced in such matters, was momentarily at a loss for words. He's blaspheming the saint. He finally managed to force out this sentence. Madame Pualis looked like she was reminiscing. That's how he is. He's bold and direct, like a bandit who breaks through the door to your soul while swearing curses. He's completely different from the gentleman in Dirige. Perhaps that's why I slept with him. That's just the normal behavior of some men in heat. Not to mention Saint Sith. Even if a deity was there, he would make him wait. Despite his lack of experience, Lumian had read enough novels written by Aurora to know a thing or two about human desire. This belongs to having his mind controlled by his lower body. No, his head was already empty during that period, filled with another liquid. Madame Puali smiled. I know that's the reason, but he did appear very charming in that situation. Heh, you're indeed an inexperienced young man. Don't you know that the same words will make people feel differently in different environments and moods? I remember the first time I had sex with the padre. He stood there, looked me in the eyes and said to me, Pualis, I want to go deeper in understanding your body and mind. If it were any other time, I would only find him a crude and vulgar pervert. I would have called for help to stop him, but at that time, my body went limp. The mood was just right. Madame Pualis smiled charmingly. It's like if I had my eye on any man, I'd say to him, how does my place tonight sound? If he really comes, I'll bring him straight into the bedroom and tell him, I want to make love with you. I love you. Lumian, as a man, how would you answer at a time like this? Lumian usually told dirty jokes to the men in the village. Although he was a little uncomfortable, he managed to keep his composure. He tried his best to recall the stories his sister had written, and the novels written by other contemporary authors. After some deliberation he said, Madam, you are my sunshine. Very talented. Madame Pualis complimented. As she spoke, she leaned forward, her eyes becoming moist. A warm breath immediately blasted Lumian's ear, and a slightly magnetic and gentle female voice sounded softly. I want to make love with you. At that moment, Lumian's heart couldn't help but tremble. His body felt numb, as though he had received an electric shock from touching a broken electrical lamp. He immediately took a step up the stairs and said to Madame Pualis, Aurora should be waiting for you. Indeed. Madame Pualis straightened her back with a smile on her face. It was as if nothing had happened. This woman. Lumian suddenly felt a little afraid of this woman. He turned around and reached the second floor in a few steps, with Madame Pualis following at a steady pace. Aurora was already waiting outside the bedroom when she heard the doorbell. What took so long? She looked at Lumian. Lumian explained vaguely, we talked about the cathedral. Aurora understood immediately. She gave her brother a look that said, pray for good luck from the eternal blazing Sunday. She turned to Madame Pualis, who had just arrived on the second floor, and asked with a smile, what's the matter? I wanted to talk about the preparations for Lent. I might need your help with the celebration, Madame Pualis said with a smile. You caught me at a bad moment. Aurora found an excuse to decline. Madame Pualis pointed at the door and said, how about you hear it first? All right. Aurora remained polite, watching his sister and Madame Pualis enter the study and close the wooden door. Lumian nodded indiscernibly, acting normally without showing any trace of returning to the crime scene. Suddenly, an idea struck him like a bolt of lightning. There is a high chance that Madame Pualis is a female warlock. Can I get superpowers from her? It would be much more convenient and safer than facing that owl head-on, while searching for the truth of the warlock, or exploring the dangerous dream ruins. After all, I have to unlock the secret as soon as possible to eliminate any hidden dangers. It's less risky once I obtain superpowers. But Lumian soon became vigilant and shook his head. He then self-reflected, how can I think that way? I don't even know if Madame Pualis is a friend or foe. How can I seek supernatural power through her? Yes, her actions didn't paint her to be a good person just now. She even made me feel a sense of danger. What's wrong with me recently? Am I too hasty and rash in pursuing superpowers? It's as if I'll die if I don't obtain them quickly. It had been nearly 2 years since Lumian discovered that his sister was a warlock. Though he had tried to obtain superpowers before, he had never worked as hard as he had in the past few days. No matter if the opportunity was good or bad, or if there was danger, as long as there seemed to be hope, he could not wait to come into contact with it. It was as if he was not picky with food after starving for ages. Phew. Thank goodness I sensed the problem in time. Otherwise, I might end up taking a more deviated and dangerous path. Lumian let out a long sigh, relieved that he had regained his normal state of mind. But he knew it was impossible to stop pursuing superpowers. He just needed choices. After all, the dangerous dream had already revealed itself, and the undercurrents in the village were getting more and more turbulent. Madame Pualis and Aurora didn't talk for long. 10 minutes later, they walked out of the study. Lumion walked Madame Pualis out of the door with his sister. He looked at his sister and asked, "What did she want you to do?" Aurora pouted and replied, "She wanted me to be the lead singer at the praise celebration. But I refused." Corda Village's Lent festival had 3 segments: Spring Elf Blessing Tour, Waterside Ritual, Praise Celebration held in the cathedral. The last segment mainly consisted of playing musical instruments and choral singing. In the Dirige region, the lead singer was often from the cathedral choir, but Cordu could only seek out singers who were good at singing as alternatives. As for musical instruments, the villagers didn't worry about it. In villages with shepherds, music or musical instruments were indispensable in their daily lives. Shepherds lived in the wild all year round, either in shacks or pits. Other than their companions and sheep, the most common thing they interacted with was the flute they carried with them. Apart from grazing, playing cards and chatting, playing the flute, and using music to comfort oneself was something almost every shepherd would do. It was precisely because of this that the phrase used to describe a shepherd in a difficult and impoverished situation was, "He doesn't even have a flute." With so many shepherds around, it was inevitable that the other villagers of Cordu would be affected. When they gathered and chatted in the square, there would always be someone playing an instrument, causing the melodious melody to reverberate. Lumion was pleased to see his sister being steadfast. "Okay," he said with satisfaction. Joining in the celebrations was enough. If one wanted to take center stage, it would be a waste of time and could attract unnecessary attention. In order to protect his eyesight, Lumion read for a while, then decided to wash up and turn in early. He considered how to safely test what was special about him in the dream. The lady's suggestions had proven accurate several times in a row, making Lumion unconsciously believe her completely. In the dead of night, Lumion entered the dream again and woke up there. He checked his pockets and confirmed that the 217 vril d'or and 25 kopit were still there. Letting out a sigh of relief, Lumion picked up his axe and steel fork and headed downstairs to the stove. The fire had already been extinguished. "The clock continues spinning when I'm not dreaming." Lumion frowned slightly. How could there be anything special about him in such a real dream? "The clock continues spinning" was a common saying in the Dirige region, meaning that time waited for no man and never stood still. In the bedroom he deemed safest, Lumion put down his tools and undressed. He walked to the full-body mirror attached to the wardrobe and checked his body inch by inch to see if there was anything different from reality. Nothing out of the ordinary. Mentally special, Lumion wasn't in a hurry to put his clothes on. Instead, he walked back to the bed and sat down cross-legged, like his sister often did when meditating. Aurora had previously taught him some superficial meditation techniques that did not involve mystical elements to foster lucid dreams. Now Lumion wanted to try and see if he could sense anything special about his mind and body in the completely quiet scene. The first step was to regulate his breathing. Lumion deepened his breathing and slowed down the corresponding frequency. As he took slow, long, and rhythmic breaths, Lumion slowly emptied his mind. At the same time, he outlined a red sun in his mind and focused all his attention and thoughts on it to eliminate other messy thoughts. Aurora had instructed him to choose objects that represented light during meditation, in case he was targeted by vile, evil things. As a believer in the eternal blazing sun, Lumion's first reaction was to visualize the sun. Gradually, his mind calmed down, and in his perception, the entire world seemed to have only that red blazing sun left. Suddenly Lumion heard something. It seemed to come from an infinite distance, yet was ringing in his ears. The sound was unclear, but had inklings of rumbling thunder. Amidst the indescribable buzzing, Lumion's heart began to race. It was as if someone had inserted a chisel into his head and stirred it a few times. An intense pain erupted, and the blazing sun turned as red as blood and quickly dyed black. The scene in his meditation shattered. Lumion's eyes snapped open, and he gasped for air. He felt like he was about to die. After almost 20 seconds, he finally recovered from the near-death experience. He instinctively lowered his head and examined his body, noticing something strange on the left side of his chest. A symbol that looked like thorns black as night seemed to grow from his heart and extend out of his body, connecting one after another like chains. Above these thorns were patterns resembling an eye and worm-like distorted lines, all bluish-black. At this moment, the tattoo-like symbols were slowly fading. Lumion was first shocked, then had many thoughts. He quickly got off the bed and went straight to the full-body mirror, aiming his back at it. Then, he tried his best to turn his head left to check the situation on his back. He could barely see the chain made of black thorns drilling into his body from his back. In other words, this chain of thorns sealed his heart and corresponding body in the form of a ring. Lumion analyzed what was special about him that was unlike reality until the symbols completely faded and disappeared. The black and bluish-black symbols are different, and the bluish-black one looks familiar. Yes, it's very similar to the old man I helped when I was wandering. It was also from that time that I began to have dreams with large amounts of fog. Lumion found the symbols to be special but meaningless, which left him feeling disappointed. The process of making them appear was extremely painful, pushing him to the brink of death. In a state that nearly knocked him out, what was the difference between facing the monster with a shotgun and delivering food to it? And if he waited until he had the strength to fight again, the special trait would have almost disappeared. It was cold in the dream, like early spring in the mountains. Lumion found it uncomfortable being naked, so he quickly put on his clothes. Just doing such a simple thing made him extremely tired, and his head hurt again. Obviously, he couldn't recover from the impact the meditation had caused him in a short period of time. Under such circumstances, Lumion decided to give up exploring for the night and not make any attempts. He would sleep well and focus on recuperating. The sky was still dark when Lumion woke up. Looking at the darkness in the house and the redness near the curtains, he carefully recalled what had happened in the dream. I've meditated many times in reality, but I didn't hear that strange sound or feel any pain. It's something special that only exists in that dream? Lumion sat up in puzzlement, planning to confirm. He followed the procedure and tried meditating again. The red sun quickly appeared in his mind, and the chaos in his mind gradually settled down. This was a familiar meditation experience for Lumion. There were no strange sounds, no intense pain, and no near-death experience. After a while, he ended his meditation, unbuttoned his shirt, and looked down at his heart. There was no symbol there. Indeed, that's the special trait of the dream. It can't affect reality. Lumion didn't know if he should be happy or disappointed. He raised his head and looked at the curtain that blocked the windows. His thoughts scattered as he thought about whether the special trait in the dream could be exploited, and how. At that moment, he saw a small shadow outside the window. Lumion's pupils dilated, turning high-strung as his instinctive reaction was to call out to his sister. But then he remembered that he was at home, and Aurora had said she would watch over him. So she should have sensed it. Slowly and carefully, he approached the window, waiting for his sister to call an end to his actions. But Aurora did not appear. Lumion came to the window, grabbed the curtain, and cautiously pulled open a crack. Outside the window was the quiet and dark night. The crimson moon hung far away in the sky. On an elm tree not far away, an owl, larger than most of its kind, with eyes that were neither dull nor stiff, stood quietly, facing Lumion's window. It looked at Lumion with an indescribable look of superciliousness. That owl! It's here again. Lumion's heart was in his throat. Just like the last time, the owl looked at Lumion for about 10 seconds before spreading its wings and flying deep into the night. Lumion was speechless. After a while, he drew the curtains and cursed. Is there something wrong with your head? You would come and take a look every single time, not saying a word before leaving. Are you mute, or is there something wrong with your IQ? Have you not learned human language after so many years? In fact, Lumion had his own guesses about the owl's actions. He believed that his sister's existence made it afraid to do anything. After all, Aurora had said that as long as he didn't leave the building at night, she could guarantee his safety. If he had stuck his head out of the window on impulse just now, the owl probably wouldn't have flown away quietly. After cursing for a while, Lumion decided to close the curtains and catch up on some sleep. He casually glanced outside and suddenly froze. More than 10 meters away, at the edge of a small forest, A figure was slowly walking over. She wore a dark-colored dress made of coarse cloth, and her hair was thin and pale white. Naroka. Lumion recognized the figure. It was Naroka, who he had asked about the legend of the warlock. Naroka's face blended into the darkness, and her eyes reflected a strange light under the faint crimson moonlight. Her movements were abnormally stiff, like a wandering ghost. Lumion subconsciously held his breath and shrank back a little. Naroka did not come in this direction. Slowly, she entered the small forest and disappeared into the deep night. Lumion was slightly worried. She doesn't seem right. Did something happen? Recently, there had been more and more abnormalities in the village. He looked outside for a while, and the night had returned to silence. Only the swaying leaves proved the existence of the wind. What are you looking at? Aurora's voice suddenly came from behind him. Lumion turned around and was delighted to see his sister, who was wearing a two-piece pajama set. Did you also notice something wrong? No, Aurora replied, her blonde hair slightly messy and fluffy from just waking up. Then she added angrily, I don't see anything wrong. All I know is that there's a guy who's up in the middle of the night, loitering at the window. It'll be dawn in an hour tops. How can it be considered the middle of the night? Lumion muttered out of habit. Then he asked, didn't you come over because of the owl? Didn't you see Naroka outside? Naroka? Aurora revealed a rare blank expression. Lumion recounted everything from the moment he woke up and realized that there was a black shadow outside the window, to the strangely behaving Naroka walking into the forest. As for the special trait he discovered while meditating in his dream, he planned to consult the mysterious woman first before considering how to tell Aurora, or hide it for a while to prevent his sister from stopping him from obtaining superpowers. Aurora furrowed her beautiful blonde brows. Something might have already happened to Naroka. Go check on them at dawn. Lumion asked subconsciously, what could have happened? How would I know? I didn't see her. There's no way I can make an accurate judgment, Aurora snapped back. You really didn't see her? Lumion thought that his sister had been monitoring him the entire time. Aurora scoffed. Do you think you can see whatever you want? If you see something you shouldn't, you have to consider which graveyard to bury me in. I won't look outside for no reason. I'll just monitor your condition. I'll only wake up if something's wrong. Lumion was stunned for a moment, and couldn't help but blink. Grande Sir is taking such a huge risk to watch over me. Aurora added earnestly. That's why I'm telling you. Don't look at what you shouldn't see, and don't listen to what you shouldn't hear. Pursuing extraordinary power is a very dangerous thing. Got it? Lumion nodded solemnly. At the same time, he thought to himself, it's precisely because it's dangerous that I can't let you go at it alone. After breakfast, Lumion followed his sister's instructions and headed straight to Naroka's house. As he approached, he saw many villagers standing outside the door, including his friends, Ava's father Guillaume Lizier, Raymond's father Pierre Greg, and the Padre's younger brother Pons Benet. What happened? Lumion carefully circled around Pons Benet and the few thugs surrounding him, and went to Raymond's side. Raymond replied sadly, Naroka passed away. Ah. Lumion was prepared for something to happen to Naroka, but he didn't expect her to be dead. Raymond rambled on. Before dawn, the Padre came to give her the last rites. She was still fine and energetic 2 days ago, when we asked her about the legend of the warlock. Why would she suddenly pass away? Before dawn? Lumion was alarmed. He realized that it was precisely that moment when he saw Naroka. The exact timing of the Padre's last rites didn't make much of a difference. Lumion's mind raced with thoughts. So what I saw was actually Naroka's ghost. This happened after the owl flew over. Can it really take away a human soul? Yes. Naroka was one of the witnesses to the warlock incident that happened back then. If I hadn't listened to Grande Sir and went out after dark, I might have been the one the Padre did last rites with. His version of it for me is probably spitting at me. Raymond didn't chat with him. He stood outside the 2-story house and quietly mourned Naroka. After Lumion reined in his thoughts, he saw Leah, Ryan and Valentine walking over. Did something happen here? Leah asked before Lumion could even greet her. They saw many people gathered on the road. Lumion sighed and said, My cabbages, an honorable old lady has passed away. Then why are all of you standing outside? Leah asked without offering any condolences, not fully convinced by Lumien's explanation. She was still wearing the same clothes as before. Lumien made an obvious sizing-up gesture, which made Leah panic. "What's wrong?" Ryan asked. Lumien smiled. "You're definitely not Dirige locals. We're from Bigor," Ryan answered frankly. Bigor was the provincial capital of the Intis Republic's Riston province, while Dirige was a city on the southern border of Riston province. It covered a large area, including the village of Cordu. Lumien nodded. "It's no wonder you don't know the customs of the Dirige region.